Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. My co-host, as always, tonight is Alex Suarez. Alex, go ahead and introduce our guests tonight. And thanks for being with me again tonight, man.
Yes, we have two guests tonight. One of them is Dennis, who should be in momentarily, and then we have here present Austin Gonzalez. He's part of the International Committee of the DSA, and he was one of the gentlemen present with me in November last year to help in the observation of the regional elections in Venezuela. It was not his first time there. Dennis also happened to be there, and this is a Venezuela special. We're going to be talking about recent revelations by Mr. Esper, who was part of the Trump administration and has recently written a book that goes into details of assassination and invasion plots between Guaido and Trump that he witnessed personally, which is very revealing and very concerning. And so I thought it would be appropriate to bring a couple experts on who have been to Venezuela, like myself, like we had Dan Kovalik the other day as well, who had been to Venezuela with me, to discuss these issues. So while we're waiting for Dennis, and in case I forget, I don't know if you could be on for the whole program, Austin. I know you're Eastern time like me. The program's usually on until 11:30, just in case it's about a 2-hour program. But at some point, I'd like to read an excerpt from a new book I'm working on. Did I tell you, Austin, I'm working on a book called The Diplomat?
No, I didn't know. Actually, yes. I think you did mention
that. I might have sent you the intro that I posted on my blog the other day. I'm working on chapter 3 right now. Of course, it's about the case of Ambassador Alex Saab. We talk about him often on the program. My current chapter is called The Georgia Betrayal. As you probably know, the Georgia courts decided negatively. It wasn't entirely a negative. They didn't say, okay, he's not a diplomat, now go ahead and proceed to prosecute in Miami. But they said that it's up to the Miami judge, Judge Scola, to decide whether or not Alex Saab is a diplomat. And because it's Miami, there's a high probability of bias. And in all probability, as a result, they're going to proceed, and that judge is going to say, for whatever reason, and it's very hard to say because all the evidence shows the contrary, that Alex Saab is not a diplomat. And so my first question to you, rather than get into the Esper story, which is a recent story, we can get into that at some point. I don't know if you had a chance to meet Camila Fabri de Saab, Alex Saab's wife, while we were down there. I got to. But what's your opinion about the case about Alex Saab, why they're making an example out of him, why they kidnapped him and extradited him to Miami?
Oh, my goodness. This is a case that I could go on for a very long time about, as you would probably imagine. I unfortunately did not get the chance to actually personally meet Camila when we were in Venezuela, but I did attend the conference, the panel discussion that they had, which was incredibly inspiring. Camila and I follow each other on Twitter, if that counts for anything. So we're Twitter mutuals.
You probably met eyes because she made a lot of eye contact with different people from the panel, really? Including with me. And then I got to get up close to her and talk to her. Sure. But you were there, like you probably looked at each other at one point, right?
Probably. And as we know, Twitter is real life. Thank you very much. So since we're
she recognized you. She runs her own Twitter. People are trying to say she's being used as a propaganda tool by Maduro. You and I know that's false. She can travel freely around Venezuela. She can post freely on Twitter, appear freely on Zoom. She was on Zoom with Oscar Lopez Rivera the other day with the Zaya from the UN, very prestigious man that helped look into the not only into the as a rapporteur the human rights violations as a result of the U.S. sanctions against the Venezuelan people, but also I believe he was one of the investigators in Cape Verde when there was physical and psychological torture of Alex Saab before they had extradited him to Miami. This is during the Trump regime, but the violations are continuing under the Biden regime as well, no?
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, people trying to say Camila's like a political prop or whatever people want to say. When I see Camila talk about Alex Saab, I see a woman talking about her husband, right? I see a woman that just wants her husband home to be with their kids, right? That's the sense that I get, right? And like Alex, you were on my podcast a couple months ago, and we went pretty deeply into the case of Alex Saab. I look at you as kind of somebody who's, I mean, you were literally at the trials, right? Or you?
I was at an arraignment and a hearing. The trial hasn't started yet. The Judge Scola has to decide whether he's diplomat or not, and then they'll decide whether to proceed. When there is a trial, I do intend to drive down to Miami. I'm about 5 hours north of Miami in another part of Florida, but whatever it takes.
I'm curious, what do you expect is going to happen? Because before I let you answer, because I'm sure you could go in a lot of different directions.
I get on Sputnik Radio a lot to talk about this as well. I don't know if I've sent you links. You and I kind of lost touch for a while, but Sputnik out of DC is the last Russian outlet left, because as you know, RT America, our comrades there, got shut down. We had interviewed Lee Camp the other day. You know, he was one of the ones that was affected by that. But Sputnik, they're still telling the truth about Venezuela. They have a lot of listeners. You have Garland Nixon, who's on Sputnik. You have a history with him back from the Venezuelan embassy. You have Pacifica Radio. He does a show with them. He does a show on YouTube. He's been censored by Facebook. No surprise there. I'm banned for life from Facebook since 2020. But he's still continuing on. So, yeah, I mean, it's important to get our voices out in the alternative media and to get familiar with the Alex Saab case. And it's important that my book gets published. I've self-published several books. I don't have to get into that, but I really want to work with a publisher. I'm looking for publishing houses this time, progressive publishers that could get it translated to Spanish as well. I can even help in the translation. I'm fluent in Spanish. But it's important, I think, that we get it out in English first, that the American people be made aware of this case, because, of course, there's a massive media cover-up. And the few journalists or so-called journalists that I've been exposing in my book and in my articles, they've done a terrible job reporting on the Saab case. I've confronted some of them face to face in the courthouse. It's just utterly ridiculous.
Well, and this raises an important question, which is that are any of the so-called journalists who report on America's foreign policy anything but political props?
I mean, you have journalists like Denis, who does incredible work, and I'm sure he'll come in momentarily. He did us earlier today, and he works for example, El Ciudadano.
Yes.
Which has a history with the Chilean left, although Denis is based in Mexico. I mean, he travels all over the place. He's been to Venezuela several times, Bolivia. He just came back from Cuba. But they've also done great interviews about Assange. Denis is originally from Australia. I believe his parents are Russian. He speaks multiple languages, including Spanish. I was going to say... Oh yeah, like one of the articles that El Ciudadano did, where Denis is one of the co-writers of, was with Garzón, and Garzón now, as a Spanish jurist, represents both Assange, who you see here on my wall, the poster of Assange, and Alex Saab, and their cases are very similar. They're both being charged with conspiracy. Their charges are very vague. There's really no substance to them. They're political trials. They're lawfare, as we call it. Right? I have my chapter 2 of the book's called Lawfare. So lawfare is, as you know, Austin, I'm sure already, is a combination between the words warfare and the law. And this is what they do under the guise of the law. They're persecuting, not prosecuting. They're trying these cases with little to no evidence. And they're doing it for political means. You're not supposed to extradite somebody for political reasons. Like even under UK and American law, let alone international law, what they're doing with Assange is clearly for political reasons, for the act of journalism, for the act of revealing war crimes. And then they call it money laundering or conspiring to money laundering for Saab, for the act of defying unilateral sanctions that the UN, that Zayas report shows, were illegal, right?
Well, I mean, the U.S. has been doing illegal things in Latin America since before World War II. I mean, the U.S.'s history in Latin America is long and nasty and is much older than the Cold War. I mean, most people don't even know that the reason Woodrow Wilson didn't want to get involved in World War I is that he was busy invading Central America.
And also Teddy Roosevelt was in Cuba before he became president. I believe he was a general then.
Well, he was
helping to instigate the U.S. getting involved there, push the Spaniards out.
I thought he was a general too. And this is one of the ways that American history, especially the sort of pop culture American history we get in our educational system, lies to us. Teddy Roosevelt was the lieutenant colonel of the Rough Riders. He wasn't even in command.
Lieutenant colonel, okay, he wasn't general yet.
Second in command. Yeah. However, he used this basically single battle where he led a charge as this huge military reputation. I mean, it wasn't quite as bad as LBJ, who was given a Silver Star for riding as a passenger in a bomber that came under fire as a congressional observer. So it was literally Congress giving one of their own a medal.
That would have been nice if Austin and I got medallions for being observers when we were in Venezuela. We didn't get anything like that. We got plenty of souvenirs, but I still have like a plastic cup from the plastic factory that we went to, and but we didn't get any medallions or anything like that, right, Austin?
Hey, that hat is better than a Silver Star because it's legit.
Yo, I wish, but
I got this nice hat, but not everybody got it. A lot of it's like if you were at the right time, at the right place at the right time. Like, for example, when I met Camila Fabri, Austin was in the audience. I just got there at the right time. She was overwhelmed. She was enveloped by people. The event was ending. And I just got there. I'm really good with timing. Like, and there was just a pause where nobody was asking her anything. And then I made my approach and talked with her, and she realized who I was. And then I'm based in Florida, where they've kidnapped her husband, and we took the picture together. And then she later followed me on Twitter. And I got a copy, one of the few copies that was available at the time. And I don't even think it's been translated to English yet. The Alex Saab books from his captivity, from his correspondence with people from when he was being held in Cape Verde, and she signed it for me. That's so that book means the world to me. That book means more than any medallion, right? More than any fake medallion like LBJ got for just being there observing, right? Right, Austin? I mean, our experience there, no matter what they gave us, it was something that we treasure. For me, even more than you, also, you know why? It was my first time. I always wanted to be in Venezuela. I know you've been there before. You met Evan Morales when you were there. But this was your first time. Oh, I didn't know you met Maduro.
He actually gave me a gift. So me and my other DSA delegates that were there, we met personally with Nicolas Maduro. And
last year?
Yes. Hold on.
I did hear some DSA people met with Maduro last year. I wasn't there for that part. I didn't realize you were there for that.
I was actually the chair of that delegation. He gave us a gift, which is his favorite Simon Bolivar biography.
Oh, wow.
A little stamp from Nicolas Maduro.
And is it English?
It's translated to English, yeah. It's like a special
Excellent. Yeah, we got to go to, I don't know if you were there, Austin. You were probably there when you went to Venezuela the first time, but we got to go to where Bolivar's buried. And actually, we went to where Chavez is buried the same day. Can you imagine how emotional that was? We went to two different places the same day. And these are places that are not in Caracas. You have to drive like an hour away to get to them. So basically it was all day conversing with the Venezuelan guides on the bus and just going and seeing these places and then bringing us back to the hotel and then taking another bus. Some people were tired and they went back to their rooms. And I was like, no, I'm ready to go on the next bus. I want to go see Chavez. This is my chance to go see where Chavez is buried. It was just like, I was just full of energy, you know?
I'm so sad I missed it. That was when I was quarantined.
Oh, shoot. My room was he had a false positive, people. In case you don't know, they tested us every few days for COVID. Luckily, it was a false positive, right, Austin?
I was even lucky. That was why I got to meet Maduro. If it was a positive, I would not obviously.
Oh, okay. So by the time they figured out it was a false positive, they were able to bring you over to the Presidente. Okay.
But I saw up close and personal, right, how devastating sanctions are because it was a false positive, but because it was so difficult to get access to like PCR tests in Venezuela at the time, I had to wait 3 days to get another one, right? And because I had to wait 3 days to get another one, even though I didn't have COVID and I didn't have symptoms, I couldn't take any chances.
I was there for a total of, I believe, 6 days. A lot of people were there for longer. It would have been 7 days, but I missed my first flight. How long were you there this time?
Oh, just recently. I was just there for I want to say 4 days. It was just the weekend.
Oh, wow. Almost the whole time you were quarantined. No wonder when I kept going to eat, I was like, where's Austin at?
Dude, exactly.
We had a great conversation that day, you remember? And then one of the guides said, oh, you're Alex Suarez. They were looking for me. They were giving me my credentials that they give you as an observer.
But I didn't know that was your first time in Venezuela. That's amazing.
Never been before. If you read my blog, I'm going to send you my blog post. It's very emotional about my trip to Venezuela. I talk about what an ordeal it was logistically to get there, right? I mean, this is when COVID was still bad. I mean, we had, for example, in November last year, it's not that far back, but we didn't have access even to the boosters yet. So I got my second shot, didn't get my booster yet. And logistically, it was a nightmare getting there through Santo Domingo. I definitely want to fly via Panama next time. I heard Panama goes a little more smoothly. When I got there, I started crying because it was like a dream come true. And I thought I wasn't going to make it because I missed the first flight. I spent the night in the airport. It was a disaster. I thought something was going to happen. The CIA was going to grab me in Santo Domingo. I always had this thought, something's going to prevent me from going. And when I finally arrived in Caracas and I saw the murals of Chavez, and I realized I was really there. I couldn't hold it in anymore.
It's amazing.
I don't cry that much, but that was something else.
I tell a lot of, because here's the thing, you said you had heard that DSA members met with Maduro, right? Like, for a lot of people in the United States who are, hostile to Venezuela, or, believe everything they hear in the media, right? There was some controversy within DSA when we came back after meeting with Maduro. People saying, "Oh my goodness, how could you do this?" Blah blah blah. Right? The same talking points you would probably imagine. I tell people all the time, go to Venezuela, see for yourself. Right.
Well, it's the opposite with me. I've been told, why do you go there and see? Then you won't be a socialist anymore. You're going to see the corruption of Maduro. And now I can finally respond and say, I have.
Exactly. No, that's what happened to me too. When right-wing exiles got really mad at us when we went down the right, what do they always say to people in the United States? Oh, if you think Venezuela or Cuba are so good, why don't you go there? I did, and it was great. So,
well, they were showing my picture outside the courthouse from like a few days before I went, or like 2 days before I went to Venezuela. I'm talking about the right-wing so-called journalists in exile that were attacking us. And when they were showing my image, they contradicted themselves because they said, I guess they're spies. They reported what I was doing, and part of what I was doing was fundraising because I'm a working-class guy. Nobody paid me to go, and so I was trying to get some donations from some comrades outside to help buy supplies to take with me for humanitarian purposes because I couldn't use all my own money for that. And so the guy was in the post was complaining. I think it was Roberto Denis. He's one of the most infamous ones. The one that was going after Alex Saab even before he was famous. And Roberto Denis is like, this Alex Suarez guy. He's going around asking people for money at the courthouse. But of course, we know he's paid by Maduro or whatever. It's like, if I'm being paid by Maduro, then why would I have to ask for donations?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not like you're a corporate Democrat who has to take as many little $5 donations as possible to make it look like they're not being bought off by corporations.
Austin, did you get paid anything to go?
Did I do what now?
Did you get paid anything to go? It's a silly question, but just for the record.
Hell no, I didn't get paid. And I wish, right? Here's the thing. Just like you said, Alex, we're working.
Well, that would have been nice if DSA paid for your ticket. I wouldn't mind if a legitimate organization paid for my ticket.
Well,
but that's not being the same thing as a sellout,
Exactly. So DSA did pay for our tickets, right? We were at least
compensated. But you weren't being paid like a salary to go.
Exactly. No, hell no, right? And this is the thing, like you say, we're actual working class people, right? We like a lot of this stuff we got to do out of pocket if we want to actually be able to go and visit these sorts of countries, right? So something that I appreciate so deeply about organizations such as the Institute of Simon Bolivar in Venezuela or ICAP in Cuba, which does.
They took care of our hotel and our food for us.
Exactly. That is how you do.
And our security and our transportation. Yep. We had polices on a motorcycle that basically treat us like diplomats when we got there, and I loved it. I felt like I was in a James Bond scene when I first got there, because remember how they drive, right, Austin? Like they get so close to those cars, and then they turn, and then when the cops beep at certain cars and they don't want to move, that's opposition, because they're thinking, these are one of the leftist observers. But there was also observers with Acción Democrática. Remember the more centrist opposition party? They had their own observers as well, and they all had approved it.
Yeah, people try to still say, the elections were rigged. They literally, PSUV lost in Barinas.
They lost in the homeland of Chavez.
Exactly.
So you're going to tell me that the town where Chavez's brother was governor, the town that's been under Chavista control since 1998, earlier this year lost to Acción Democrática, and that's a dictatorship? Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about Juan Guaido later. In fact, I know we'll talk a little bit more about Juan Guaido later.
Yeah, because we're going to go to the Esper story, and that's related to Guaido. Yeah,
exactly. I tell people all the time, so Venezuela is a dictatorship, but Juan Guaido is just running free, right? If anybody did that in the United States, they would be.
Well, you know what Chomsky said? It's interesting you mention that, because Chomsky was interviewed when I was trying to make the Embassy Protectors film about what we did at the Venezuelan embassy. I set up my co-director to interview Chomsky, because I've known Chomsky for a long time. And when he asked them about Guaido and what he was doing, calling for U.S. invasion and sanctions, and the media and their role in pushing for regime change, Chomsky said if we had something like that going on in the United States, they would have sent him to Guantanamo.
Yeah.
They would have been sent to a firing squad or something. And here we have Guaido walking the streets, heavily secured, to protect him from Maduro's forces, but protect him from average day Venezuelans that will throw stones at him because the guy's a traitor.
To be fair, someone did do that once. And it's tremendously unfair to forget that an American did pull the Juan Guaido thing once. He was an eccentric millionaire in San Francisco who declared himself emperor of the United States of America.
I did not hear about this. You always know about the most ludicrous stuff in history that nobody's heard about. You ask Chris and he knows about it.
Instead of cops coming to his house immediately and carrying him off into prison, he became a local celebrity, and everybody paid attention to him and pretended he was important.
Like in the 70s or something. A lot of wild stuff.
Oh, no. This was long before that. This was.
Don't tell me it was 1800s.
1800s, 1900s,
maybe early 1900s,
maybe even a little earlier. It wasn't Gold Rush; it was after the Gold Rush. But
well, do you know that Che Guevara, is on my shirt? His grandfather was born in California because of the Gold Rush.
Yeah.
When it was part of the United States, this is not when it was part of Mexico. So isn't that ironic? He's known as an anti-imperialist against what the U.S. was doing, and his grandfather was American. Although his grandfather was the son of Argentines that went to the Gold Rush. But yeah, he had a connection there. Yeah.
Fun fact: the first prime minister, I can't pronounce the Gaelic word for it, but the first prime minister of Ireland
was Cuban.
Was a Cuban American.
Yeah, Cuban American.
His father was a Cuban American, and his mother was an Irish American, and he was born in New York City. Which, of course, there is a proud tradition, both good and bad, of people being born in New York City and going back to be politicians in their parents' countries. The most famous examples being Roman Zavarich and Ivan Lazoit in Ukraine, who were born in New York City.
Well, there's also
the kids of Ukrainian Nazis. And who went back in the 90s and gave up their U.S. citizenship to become Ukrainians again and become involved in the Ukrainian Nazi movement.
Right. And also there's cases in Latin American history where foreigners have become head of state. And they earn their right to become head of state. For example, the first head of state of the Cuban Republic when they kicked the Spaniards out was Dominican, Maximo Gomez. And he fought in the War of Independence. He was one of the few to survive. I mean, one of the first to die was Martí. Jose Martí is very famous. He died on horseback, shot by the Spaniards. But Gomez, who was one of his aides-de-camp, he survived and became head of state for a time. And then, of course, what was the other example I was going to say? Bolivia. Bolivia was named after Bolivar, although Bolivar was never the head of state of Bolivia. The head of state of Bolivia was Sucre, who was the right-hand man or aide-de-camp of Bolivar, who was Venezuelan, and whose wife was Ecuadorian. But he was an integrationist. He wanted to spread the liberation throughout South America. And so he was the first head of state of Bolivia, and it was his idea to name the country after Bolivar. A lot of people get confused, and I'm sure you know the difference, Austin, between Bolivarian and Bolivia, right? Because Bolivarian is the change in the name of Venezuela that Chavez did in the early 2000s. So actually, Venezuela is not its name. It's the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And so, yes, Bolivia was named in honor of Bolivar. It's not necessarily always been of the Bolivarian ideology. So the Bolivarian ideology, which has been adapted to the socialism of the 21st century, is what you see encompassed in the name and in the Constitution. Since the new Constitution was in the late 90s. Then by the early 2000s, they changed the name of the country to Bolivarian. So that's what you see in Venezuela, correct, Austin?
Absolutely correct. And it's about reviving that dream of integrationism, right? As you mentioned, of Sucre and Bolivar, right? That's why Bolivarianism, right? Latin American integration, which is, I tell people all the time, is a core component of 21st century.
Sucre was assassinated in Colombia, and Bolivar was sent to exile in Colombia. He was going to flee to Europe, and then he got sick and died on the coast of Colombia. But a lot of people don't realize that they suffer the consequences of liberating because the oligarchs went after them. The oligarchs that resented these countries from being liberated because they have benefited went well under the Spanish control.
And people wonder why a country like Colombia has been so ruled by oligarchs ever since. That's why, because the oligarchs won, right?
They won in Colombia, yes.
That's why
assassinated Sucre on Colombian soil, got away with it, and then facilitated Bolivar being exiled.
Yep.
Let's be very clear, though, that a big part of the reason Colombia has been so right-wing for so long has to do with what we were talking about in that Hollywood CIA headquarters at Langley.
Well, not only that, Panama. Not always been, but Panama tends to be more to the left because of resentment of U.S. occupation.
Yeah.
The U.S. occupied Panama and built the Panama Canal and did a coup there, against Noriega. Was probably behind the mysterious death of Torrijos before that. Panama was also part of the Grand Colombia project that encompassed Venezuela, Colombia, and Panama under Bolivar.
Panama was part of until Teddy Roosevelt supported rebels and started the first Banana War, which was officially the War of Panamanian Independence or something like that. I don't know what they actually called it, but it was basically a war between oligarchs in northern Colombia who wanted to make Panama an independent country in order to make more money selling out to the U.S. And that was how the Panama Canal eventually got built, because Teddy Roosevelt went to Panama, started a war to take it away from Colombia, and there's Panama.
Teddy Roosevelt was all over the place. Just in case, Austin, we call ourselves eclectic, so we go off on tangents, historical tangents, especially revolutionary history.
I was about to say, I just mentioned I was just in Puerto Rico for a couple months. I was literally right by Roosevelt Roads, which is the name of the former military base.
I'm sure he was in Puerto Rico, too.
Why is it called Roosevelt Roads? Because of the Roosevelt family. Why? Because you mentioned Teddy Roosevelt was in Cuba. That's when they annexed Puerto Rico, too.
Yep.
When they were
Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War, yep.
So Teddy Roosevelt, no, we don't like him in Puerto Rico. No, we don't
well,
like him.
So the fun part about the Spanish-American War, and I say fun very sarcastically, is that it happened because there was a president who was in debt to oligarchs, literally almost, because William McKinley was only able to run for president because a bunch of rich Republican businessmen paid off his debts. Everybody was saying, you owe too much money to too many people. You cannot run for president. People will say you are susceptible to bribery because of your debts. So the businessmen who wanted him to run for president bribed him so everyone could say he wasn't susceptible to bribery.
Now, see, I didn't know that. That's amazing. In Puerto Rico, we call McKinley the White Devil. That's McKinley
as one should.
El Diablo Blanco.
Exactly, because he's Roosevelt. He was doing that Rough Rider. Okay, whatever. McKinley, he's the one that annexed Puerto Rico.
McKinley was president.
You talk about Rough Riders to young people to be like, oh, Rough Riders, DMX, right?
Yeah, the good Rough Riders, not the bad ones.
We're not talking about the rap group of Rough Riders. We're talking about the original Rough Riders. Yeah.
R.I.P. DMX.
Well, now, and this is the real, because it was a colonial war. We weren't fighting the Cubans or the Puerto Ricans. We were fighting the Spanish imperial military there. But we just had to make their empire ours afterwards. And I mean, we had a long war in the Philippines because of that.
There was a lot of African Americans that defected in the Philippines to the Filipino side. Yes. And also there was a lot of African Americans that stayed behind. That's why they have such a big African population in Panama. They stayed behind in Panama because they didn't want to return to discrimination in the United States.
When they say that Afghanistan was our longest war, even longer than Vietnam, what they forget is that the Philippine War was just a little bit longer than Vietnam too.
Interesting. I didn't realize it was that long. So it wasn't as long as Afghanistan, but it was a little longer than Vietnam.
The Philippine War was a big deal. I mean, you don't hear much about it now, and it's kind of shocking. But the Philippine War was why Smedley Butler wrote his book about war being a racket.
And he single-handedly stopped the fascist coup against FDR. I'm not saying FDR was the perfect president. I'm just saying that there was even worse extremist elements that wanted to take over. They thought Smedley Butler went along with the operation. He ended up exposing them to U.S. Congress, and these guys were not put in jail. FDR just made a deal with them so he could pass the New Deal. You had Senator Prescott Bush, who was pro-Nazi, the grandfather of Bush II, that was involved in that coup attempt. Very powerful guys.
Okay, so I mentioned Ukrainian Nazis before. I gotta mention Ukrainian Nazis again because you mentioned Prescott Bush. So Poppy Bush, of course, came to national prominence as Nixon's RNC chairman, Gerald Ford's CIA director, and Ronald Reagan's vice president.
Powerful guy.
As Ronald Reagan's running mate in 1980, one of the big groups that raised money for Reagan Bush, both Reagan to get nominated in the first place and for Reagan to win, was an anti-communist group called the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. And the chairman of this group was Yaroslav Stetsko, who was literally the former sidekick of Stepan Bandera, who spent time in the concentration camp with him and was released.
In the VIP wing of the concentration camp. The Germans were garnering favor with him.
So the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations were a bunch of all these Nazis from Soviet republics who were against the Soviet Union and had hooked up with the Nazis because they hated the Soviet Union so much. And some of them were genuinely considered by people like Alfred Rosenberg to be better Nazis than a lot of the German Nazis.
You see that?
Well, what it was is they were trying to prove that they were anti-Slavic, even though they were also Slavic.
This group,
they had to outdo the Nazis with how racist they were against Jews and Russians in the camp.
And Poles. You cannot forget.
And Poles are also Slavic. Their language is Slavic.
What people do not remember is that Lviv used to be a Polish city.
And that's one of the cities that's in Ukraine. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what is it? Galicia or Galicia?
In the western part, yes.
Yeah. It was Eastern Galicia, which was home to Ukrainians and Poles and a couple of smaller minority groups, and was originally mostly Pole but strongly Ukrainian. And the balance completely changed because of pogroms between the rise of the OUN in the late 20s and then, of course, World War II.
But anyways, I wanted to get back onto the story about Mark Esper. I have it in front of me because there's a book that he wrote called A Sacred Oath. It's funny he used the word sacred while he's admitting being involved in such terroristic operations, trying to kill a head of state, trying to invade a nation.
Let's remember who Mark Esper is, too. Mark Esper is the guy who was considered a corrupt corporate insider who by no means should be allowed near the position of Secretary of Defense by all the respectable DC liberals when Trump appointed him. And yet now he has been embraced in all sorts of ways by those same liberals. First, because he supposedly stood up against Trump to prevent a coup on January 6th. And second, because of this book where he's once again revealing more of Trump's secrets, too late for it to do any good.
He actually makes Guaido look worse than Trump.
And
he's probably telling the truth for whatever reason. Sometimes they tell the truth in Washington for ulterior motives. But
if you wait to tell your old boss's scandals until it's too late to do anything about it, you are not a brave truth teller. You are a scumbag cashing in.
I'm not saying I admire the guy. I'm not saying.
I know.
But knowing Guaido's behavior, closely following Guaido's complicity in different acts throughout the years to sabotage the Venezuelan process that Austin and I witnessed, this story seems very consistent.
Yeah.
So from what I understood of the story that's been revealed so far, the portion of the book where Mr. Esper says firsthand what he's witnessing, high-level talks between Trump and Guaido. Guaido studied at George Washington University, speaks perfect English, by the way. And that's down the street from the State Department where they recruit for CIA. So Guaido has early ties. But anyways, he's talking about in 2019, at the time that we were defending the Venezuelan embassy in D.C., Guaido was going to Washington for these talks where they were hiring mercenaries to try to kidnap or assassinate Maduro for bounty. And then Guaido was begging. This is according to Mr. Esper, not me. Begging Trump to invade Venezuela with U.S. troops. And then he said that Trump was disgusted by Guaido. He saw Guaido as weak. He said, how can a man call for an invasion of his own country? I see Maduro as strong. And it's a shame that there wasn't more advisors around Trump that said, okay, if you think Maduro's strong, why don't you start negotiating with him? No, they were pushing for no, keep supporting this loser, this pathetic loser, Guaido.
So who were Trump's advisors, though? A bunch of establishment Republicans. I mean, maybe from
the Trump says anti-establishment. Give me a break. Look at the people he had around him.
Yeah, well, no, everybody was. I mean, just because people are Nazis does not make them anti-establishment. I'm sorry. I mean, this is something that I will go to my grave believing. Nobody supports the establishment more than Nazis. Don't listen to Tucker Carlson.
They just do so in a hypocritical fashion. Right. They do so being two-faced, right, Austin?
No, 1,000,000%. And like, so I have so many different thoughts about a lot of this. And I think this actually does segue, this story about Guaido actually segues quite well from the Ukraine stuff in a lot of ways. And the reason I would say that is because it's that consistent theme of the United States' #1 mission being stomping out the left everywhere, right? And what does that naturally mean? That means funding the far right everywhere.
Yes.
That means working with Nazis everywhere.
Zelensky shut down all the progressive parties in Ukraine.
He shut down all the socialist parties because they were against the war.
Mm-hmm.
And all the socialist parties, even the ones that were mostly Ukrainian speakers and not in any way associated with Russia or pro-Russian policy, a lot of the Ukrainian socialists supported the DHR and the DPR and the LPR based on good old-fashioned Marxist-Leninist ideas of self.
Right. It wasn't out of ethno solidarity. It was out of ideology, because a lot of those people fighting in the East, they're not Putinists. They're leftists. They'll take Putin's support, but they're leftists that are fighting. In Kiev.
There's a lot of conflicting news about who the separatists actually are, and
I've
what's
seen them
frustrating
pictures of Che in their offices, like they define themselves as leftists.
What's frustrating, though? What's frustrating is that the groups that support the breakaway, the separatists in Ukraine the most are all, and this is not the only example of this, I'll admit, but they're all either socialists, communists, anarchists, or Nazis. Nobody in the quote unquote normal liberal world is saying anything good about these people. The sad fact, I hate to admit that I sometimes do browse right-wing sites, though I always check the original source when I read something there. The sad thing is that some of the best journalism being done in Europe about what's happening in Ukraine is only getting published in the U.S. on the worst right-wing sites.
And also, why did it take only one right-wing libertarian to stop the $40 billion going to the Nazis? It took Rand Paul. Nobody on the left. The entire squad. Okay, this is something else I want to talk to Austin about real quick, because DSA has been under a lot of attack lately. And I know there's a civil war going on at DSA, and you have your own side, Austin. I get that. But your perspective as being a leader in DSA, you started a chapter there. You're part of the International Committee. You were sent by DSA to Venezuela. So your opinion on how they're trying to portray DSA as a monolith, that they're all in favor of the aggression against Russia. I mean, you had an article a couple of years back where I challenged Max Blumenthal to a debate, and debated Caleb Moffitt instead. And you remember, I talked to you about this in Venezuela. They were attacking DSA in a very unjust way. Certain chapters have had certain leaders that were corrupt. I mean, you and I could admit that. We don't have to get into names. But the rank and file and then leaders such as yourself who are more revolutionary are also part of DSA. So it's not a monolith. And the way they use Trotsky it's the same thing as being pro-regime change. That's ridiculous as well. There's many forms of Trotskyism. There's orthodox, there's non-orthodox, and then there's Trotskyists that like Maduro as well. So what's your take? We're all naming names on what DSA's position is. Like, there's certain revolutionary members that are more like yourself inclined to say, no, we need to stay out of Ukraine. We shouldn't be aggressive towards Russia.
I will speak up on the Trotskyists here, because let's be really clear. Trotskyists say two things. First, they say Maduro is a liberal Democrat and not really a socialist and kind of an opportunist. But they also say He's also the legitimate head of state, democratically elected in the United States, has no business fucking with him.
Well, I've heard Trotsky say we can't support Maduro politically, but only
well, they don't support
socially, something like that. But those are only the most orthodox.
So you have to remember
that, like Austin and me, that are not orthodox, we believe we have to support him in every way because he's an anti-imperialist.
You have
we might not agree with every particular policy, but if he's legitimately anti-imperialist and he's being backed by the majority of people in those elections, we need to support him. Isn't that correct?
You have to remember, definitely, but you also have to remember that there's quote unquote legitimate Trotskyism, which is 2 or 3 very organized parties, some of which have excellent media.
World Socialist website is very respected on the left.
Yes, I like the World Socialist website a lot, even though I do not 100% agree with everything that the SEP publishes on it. I have good working relationships with several WSSW writers, and their position is really clear. No, we don't support Maduro. We're for international socialist revolution, but the U.S. shouldn't be invading. The U.S. shouldn't be overthrowing him. Keep your hands off Venezuela.
Right.
Okay, so I have a million different things I'd love to say.
Yeah.
So okay, where do I start? So Alex, going to kind of your question there as far as like DSA. So a little bit of clarification here. So you're right. I did start a couple chapters in DSA. I was, not only am I still a current member of the International Committee, I was actually one of the founders of this current iteration of the International Committee. And the reason I was one of the founders is because I was actually a 2-time member of the board of directors of the organization, right? So like basically like the top level leadership body of the organization. I long considered myself on the left wing of the board of directors, right? And like to say that there's been like a battle within the DSA for almost like, to me right now, one of the biggest debates that is raging within DSA, which love it or hate it, right, is the largest socialist organization within the United States, right? Does have
largest organization claiming to be socialist.
There you go, exactly. Does have members of Congress, does have influence, right? The biggest reason I was able to meet in a closed door meeting with Nicolas Maduro is because Maduro recognizes that. He recognizes, oh, let me get a photo op with these DSA people, and maybe I can get talk with members of Congress, right? He recognizes that.
Yes.
And me on the other end, right? I recognize that it was important to get DSA members in a room with Nicolas Maduro to show other people, no, there are good people in DSA trying to do serious work, literally meeting with Nicolas Maduro, something that, like we just said, some Trotskyist groups wouldn't even do.
Well, also Maduro gave the replica of the Sword of Boulevard, which is only given to honorary figures, to Max Blumenthal at one point.
That's amazing.
And so they were trying to make it Maduro versus DSA, but Maduro is more intelligent than that. So I'm glad he was able to work with you and others to organize that meeting that I remember was reported on. I didn't realize you were there. I didn't see in the footage. You might have been off in the corner, but that's good to know.
I was actually the chair of the delegation. So once again, so a little bit more. I'd say one of the biggest debates that rages within DSA right now is electoral accountability, right? And more broadly, what does it mean to be a DSA member, right? DSA is not a democratic centralist organization, right? So though we have an adopted political platform, which has, no to sanctions on Venezuela, solidarity with mass left movements in Latin America, U.S. withdrawal from NATO, right? That's in the DSA political platform. It's not a democratic centralist organization. So there's no way to actually like hold anybody accountable to what it means to be a DSA member, right? There was a huge debate, which actually I don't want to make this about myself here or whatever, but the reason I'm no longer on the board of directors of DSA is because I actually resigned in protest a couple months ago. And the reason
was it over the rescinding of an endorsement?
It was over Jamal Bowman, one of our members of Congress. And Jamal Bowman voted to increase funding to Israel for the Iron Dome.
Oh, the Iron Dome. That's terrible. Yeah.
Yes.
Which was
at least AOC abstained, but that he voted in favor is really bad.
He voted in favor. And there was a huge controversy and like ideological struggle within DSA over, okay, well, how do we address this? Do we expel him? Do we censure him? What do we ultimately the board of directors voted to take no sort of punishment, right? That was not what I wanted to do, right? And a couple other members of the board of directors. Fast forward a couple months later, there was a bit of a debate, an argument between the board of directors and some of the Palestinian organizers within DSA. It got pretty ugly, right? And because things got ugly, I felt in my conscience, in my good faith as a communist, as a socialist, I could not continue on the board of directors knowing the lack of accountability that was being held toward members of Congress that are literally complicit in the genocide against our Palestinian comrades, our Palestinian brothers and sisters, right? So I resigned in protest. I wrote a letter saying, oh my God, I'm mad about all this stuff, right? But with that said, I'm still involved in the International Committee. I still do work with them. No longer in the board of directors, though. But the reason I mentioned that is because that kind of goes to what you're saying here, Alex, right? Or what you're asking here, right? Which is, yes, you're right. DSA is a Big 10 organization. It's multi-tenancy. A lot of people believe a lot of different things. But right now, one of the central questions that I think DSA is grappling with is electoral accountability. What does it mean to be an elected politician that claims to be a DSA member? I favor the line of more electoral accountability, right? If you're going to be a DSA member in Congress, at the least, you should have like a monthly phone call with the board of directors, at the least.
I understand the reasoning behind not rescinding any endorsement, because then they think that others in Washington are never going to seek their endorsement because they're not going to stay behind them. But also, it's a question of principle. I would be in favor of rescinding endorsements of every single progressive, for example, that voted for the $40 billion, because half of that $40 billion would have erased all homelessness within the United States. And also the guarantee to not fund Nazis was lifted a few years ago in U.S. Congress. So that's unconditional support. That means it could go to the Azov, it could go to all those battalions. And it's at a time when there's no freaking baby formula. This is just nuts.
The dirty secret that nobody wants to talk about is that the people actually fighting the war for Ukraine are mostly the Azov and Adar battalions, who are the Nazis.
The Nazis were the last to be thrown out of Mariupol. They're the ones doing most of the fighting because the Ukrainian soldiers are demoralized. A lot of them don't want to fight the Russians. Really, they don't feel any affinity to Zelensky. Who are the ideologues, the extremists? They're the ones that are continuing the fight. They're the ones that are going to acquire those weapons.
It's really suspicious that civilians keep using basements of buildings the Nazis are using as headquarters for shelters.
Well, isn't that sad though? That when the Israelis bomb a building,
Palestine.
When the Israelis bomb a building, well, that's what I'm going to say about Palestine. When the Israelis bomb a building in Gaza, they always use it as justification, the IDF, that they were using them as human shields. In most cases, when it's looked into, that's found to be utterly false when the UN looks into it in the occupied territories. Now, in Ukraine, though, from what I've seen so far, they're actually doing it.
There's video.
They're actually, the Nazis, one of their tactics is to go into a civilian home, and this civilian doesn't have any affinity necessarily with the Azov. They could even be ethnic Russians themselves, and they're using those buildings to attack Russian soldiers, trying to make it inevitable that the civilians will be hurt.
Well, yeah, there was someone, it might be the same interview, there was a civilian who got out of Mariupol who was basically saying Azov wasn't letting civilians leave Mariupol.
So these corridors that they're complaining in I call them the mainstream media, that the Russians won't let them go. Really, who's sabotaging the corridors are the Azov. They're using their influence to sabotage those corridors.
Well, the Azov people have had people on the border, quote unquote, looking for Russian spies, by which they mean anybody leaving because they don't want to fight.
And by the way, there's a lot of Russian-speaking people in the eastern outskirts of Kiev. It's not just all the way in Donetsk and Luhansk. Like Bucha, for example, is a mostly Russian town. And so they tweeted out, the Azov, that, we're going to go and find anybody that collaborated with the Russians who just left Bucha. And then you find all these dead bodies with white bands around their arms, which means you're pro-Russia. Don't shoot me if you're a Russian soldier. And they're saying, look what the Russians did. Why would they massacre their own people that are supporting them? That feel like they're being liberated rather than an invasion. This was clearly the Azov doing the massacres and then using it as a false flag. That's why they're not talking about it anymore. Where's this UN investigation into the Bucha war crimes? No, it was the other side that did it. So now they don't want to investigate.
Remind me who has veto. Austin, you're in the International Committee of the DSA. Remind me who holds permanent vetoes in the UN Security Council again?
United States will be one of them.
Yeah. I was thinking that. Yeah, but Russia, yeah, and so basically that means that the UN is going to be completely useless for anything related to Ukraine, because the two most interested parties, the U.S. and Russia, both have permanent Security Council vetoes.
Most countries in the world have signed on to the ICC, but the two major countries that are not part of the ICC are Russia and the United States as well. So the probability that the ICC will prosecute Putin or any Russian leaders is very little as well.
What's disturbing is that this has already turned, I mean, fully transformed into, like, here's the thing. What's amazing is anybody who really believes this is a war between Kiev and Moscow. This isn't a war between Kiev and Moscow. This is a war between Washington and Moscow, right? Kiev is merely a puppet for Moscow, right? Fundamentally.
It's a war between Washington and Moscow being fought by proxies who were originally almost entirely in Donbass.
Yep.
And it spread beyond Donbass because Zelensky, when he ran, promised three things. He was going to clean up corruption. This, of course, was before the Panama Papers. And I'm sorry, no, not the Panama Papers. What were the more recent ones?
I think it was also a WikiLeaks revelation. I just don't remember which paper.
Yeah, no, it was the more recent one. I can't remember what it was called now. But yeah, Zelensky has all sorts of money and is apparently corrupt, and he's getting his money from the same.
Yeah, there's a Ukrainian-Israeli billionaire that funds Zelensky. That also funded the production company that did the series that Zelensky was in when he was an actor.
And at the same time, Zelensky promised he was going to make peace with Russia and crack down with the Nazis.
Well, the guy who really wanted to make peace with Russia, he was arrested in the middle of the campaign.
Yeah,
I think the CIA was involved with that because they wanted to make sure Zelensky was going to win because they knew he was going to sell out the most.
Instead, he's made peace with the Nazis and cracked down on the Russians.
Of course. And the United States knew he was going to do this. A lot of people portray it as, well, he tried. Zelensky went to the Nazis and said, drop your guns. They didn't cooperate. He felt threatened by them. No, he was never serious about it. He might have showed up once, but it was like a joke. He was never serious about taking on the Nazis within his own battalions.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is he partied with them? He basically said, "We support you." He took lots of propaganda.
Well, I'm not trying to use the drug card, but there is a lot of legitimate claims that he is a drug abuser, that's quite possible. He could have partied with them in that way as well, or even with Hunter Biden. Who knows? Hunter Biden did hang out around Ukraine.
If he's using drugs to cope with the stress of being president, I totally understand it. The rumor is he's not the first.
I just hope it doesn't affect his judgment even more. But whether he drugs or not, it's indisputable that he's a sellout. That's the main thing. He's a sellout. He's dangerous, and he's threatening world peace. And I'm not just blaming it on Zelensky, but I have no respect for the guy. For me, he's like a Guaido with power. Well, imagine if Guaido actually had power, how bad he could be. He could start World War III in South America. So Zelensky, for me, is like the Ukrainian Guaido, only he has power, so he's more dangerous.
Yep. He's a puppet, full stop. That's why I say this is a war between Washington and Moscow, right? Anybody who puts the Ukraine flag in their bio or whatever, you might as well put a U.S. flag in your bio, right?
And they never put Yemeni or Palestinian flags. Notice that? Every person I see that they only put the Ukraine flag. I think they're racist. Honestly,
yeah, actually, that's a good point. We're occupying Somalia. This broke just a couple of days ago. We're moving massive amounts of troops to occupy Somalia.
Bloodthirsty imperialists, man.
We weren't even admitting we were at war with Somalia except for drone strikes, and now we're occupying the country.
Yep.
I wanted to go in
war in Ethiopia, which is between the Ethiopian government and people we originally supported to start a war in Somalia.
Yeah, neighboring Somalia. I would check your DMs just in case Dennis wrote back. I know he wrote us earlier. He might have got confused on the time zone to make sure he could call in for the last portion of the show. And if you don't see anything, maybe check YouTube comments. But I wanted to read to Austin and our listeners a small portion from chapter 3 of The Diplomat, the book I'm working on, and Alex Saab that I was alluding to earlier. And this one's called the Georgia Betrayal. And it says, as I alluded to in the prior chapter, the decision of the Georgia courts on the diplomatic status of Alex Saab was pending. The defense showed the documents that prove and I put in parentheses, and this has not been reported on properly by Joshua Goodman, David Rivero, or any of these quote-unquote journalists covering the case in the quote-unquote mainstream, that since 2018, Alex Saab has been a diplomat for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, that is the government led by Nicolas Maduro. One of the few articles in English that came out on this decision was by Mr. Goodman, who only mentioned the documents between Venezuela and Iran in 2020 that showed Saab was a diplomat, and not the 2018 documents. The U.S. did not rupture diplomatic relations with Venezuela, recognizing a fake president, Guaido, till 2019. Therefore, the argument that Saab is not a real diplomat, since the U.S. did not recognize Maduro, is null and void. That is why the Georgia courts could not say he's not a diplomat. What they did instead was a cowardly move that betrays the principles of the Vienna Convention, which the U.S. is a signatory of, and domestic law. They said they will leave it to the lower court in Miami, Judge Scola's jurisdiction, to decide whether he's a diplomat. Although Saab has a right to appeal any decision by Scola in this regard. This just draws out the process further, as Saab has continued to be denied bail, denied his right to be interviewed, so we can hear his side. I will show my article about my experience at the Saab hearing of February to give you an idea of what it was like as a supporter in the courtroom and give the Georgia decision a better context. And I'll leave it from there. But literally, when I was there in Miami back in February, none of this Alex Saab supporters wanted to enter the courtroom. They wanted to stay outside and protest. So I quickly realized I was the only person in the galley that was an Alex Saab supporter. All the other people that were there were hostile media, the lawyers, and the judge, and of course the security and the bailiff.
Was Camila there?
No, Camila has not entered the United States, and I wouldn't if I were her, because they could arrest her next. They're trying to go after her family in Italy. She can't even go back to Italy right now.
That's crazy.
His entire family is being persecuted. His son, when he turned 18, who's not political at all, was sanctioned by the U.S. just for being Alex Saab's son. So this is a persecution that's affecting the whole family. This is lawfare. And so I can say firsthand what happened, and I'm the only one. And so I'm using the fact that I'm the only one. I'm using the fact that I'm the only person invited by the United Socialist Party of Venezuela that lives in Florida, in the state where Alex Saab is kidnapped, to use my voice to show the truth of this case. And that's why it's important to me. It's not about recognition for myself. It's about getting the word out. So it's important to me, and I hope there's a publisher listening today, or will listen at some point, to get a publisher to really help distribute this book so the truth can get out, because we can't rely on the media. You have, stenographers of the elite. You have prostitutes, or what Trotsky would call prostitutes of the pen, like David Rivera.
That's really unkind to sex workers. We should not insult sex workers by comparing, by quoting Trotsky in that way.
Well, I have nothing wrong. I have nothing against sex workers.
No, I know.
I have something against somebody selling out.
Oh, definitely. I'm just
so leaving out the sex part, we'll just say stenographers of the elite. So these stenographers have no principles, and it goes against the foundations of journalism. I have a degree in journalism when I was an undergrad. Journalists were supposed to be the watchdog of the government. Instead, they've been complicit with the government and with the corporations and what the empire is doing.
One of the few things I'm still willing to quote Glenn Greenwald on is when he said that, when he was still writing for The Intercept, that Ken Delanian was a paid stenographer for the military intelligence complex. And I think that really boils down to a lot of the MSNBC coverage about Russiagate, Venezuela, the Ukraine, everything. Their reporter whose job is to keep an eye on intelligence stuff is basically a suborned asset.
It's a shame that, and I used to be a big admirer of Greenwald and the work he did with Snowden. I've unfollowed him in the past few months. It's a shame to see how he's gone to the right. He's supporting the CIA spoiler candidate in Brazil now.
I keep saying this.
And you see people like Blumenthal as well who've gone to the right on different things and over the vaccine. It's really a shame to see this.
This is not new. This is what I try. I'm old, and being old, I guess, makes a difference. I have a perspective.
He's only 45, Austin. He's not that old. I'm
older than a lot of the 20-somethings I talk politics with on a regular basis. I'm older than a lot of
You're wiser than them, I'm sure.
I remember just a few things before their time because I was paying attention a little earlier. It's just the extra few years. But I mean, it's not a matter of Greenwald suddenly changed into someone else. In 2005, Glenn Greenwald was writing articles saying that if you thought that Tom Tancredo was a Nazi because he believed in replacement theory, that you were a bad faith critic. Does that sound familiar to you? Because he's using that exact same defense of Tucker Carlson now. Greenwald has not changed.
Well, we interviewed somebody who was on Tucker Carlson's show multiple times and was treated very fairly by him, and that's Dan Kovalik. And we also have to recognize about Tucker Carlson that he interviewed Anya Parampil when we were at the embassy in D.C. He's done interviews with leftists and treated them with a lot more respect than MSNBC has. That's because he's more of a libertarian Rand Paul type. So yes, on the issues of race, I detest Tucker Carlson. I'd probably never go on his show. But at the same time, he has interviewed some good people. That's all I'm saying.
I don't have a problem with people going on his show if they're not upholding his narrative. But Glenn upholds Tucker's narrative every time he goes on Tucker's show. And then he defends Tucker after he goes on his show.
Absolutely.
And so you can't say that Glenn Greenwald goes on Tucker to challenge Tucker's narrative and tell the truth from the left, because he doesn't.
Yeah, I remember I was confronting a right-winger outside the Venezuelan embassy in 2019, and he mentioned Tucker Carlson, and that was shortly after Tucker Carlson had interviewed Anya Parampil, did an excellent interview with her about what's really going on. And I said, what are you doing on the other side then? You just mentioned that you like Tucker Carlson. Did you see his interview with Anya? So yeah, some of these people are idiots. Like they don't even watch the show. The journalists they're saying that they support.
So let's be people. I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't ever watch Tucker or people shouldn't ever go on Tucker, because I mean, sometimes you're going to hear some people on his show who won't be able to get on other TV. That's just how it works.
He interviewed Dakota Lilly as well, who was with us in Venezuela. That's how Dakota Lilly became famous, Austin. Actually, I think they invited him to Venezuela after he was on Tucker Carlson's show for the first time.
If you challenge Tucker's narrative too well, you probably won't end up on the air at all unless you're somebody who's really going to bring in ratings. And
yeah, he has different reasons for bringing people on. I'm not saying he's just trying to seek truth or anything like that. Yeah.
I mean, he wants to have credibility as a populist, and to do that, he has to try to talk to people who actually believe populist things. But
I'll be right back.
But I see a lot of weird support for Tucker Carlson out there from people who should know better lately. And now I'm off on another tangent, but I mean, it's just, I can't explain. I mean, why is a nasty little rich boy white supremacist so popular with this weird element on the supposed left?
That's a good question.
I mean,
this is one of the cups given to me by the Venezuelan plastic factory.
Up there too.
I recovered.
I clearly should have went. Damn.
Yeah, because there was a lot of plastic they gave us, like a huge bag, and I said, I'm going to leave these to the hotel workers. But there was a few things I took out of the bag, including this cup, so I was able to recover this.
There you go.
Smuggled it back in the United States. Because if they found out this was Venezuelan, they would say, oh, no, you can't bring that in. That's against the sanctions, right?
Yeah. No,
what was the question you asked, Chris, when I was going to get my lemonade?
Well, it's like there's this weird crowd that needs to be on the left and is mostly white, and maybe that's the tell. Maybe it's the mostly white part, but they seem very quick to defend Tucker Carlson and Glenn Greenwald as people who are somehow allies and truth tellers and populists. And it's not ever been true. I mean, I understand
a lot of it's friendship too, Chris, though, because if Tucker ever goes to Brazil, him and Glenn are going to have beers together. And, it's like with Lee Camp and Nick Bronner, right? We interviewed Lee Camp. I love Lee Camp to death. If I see him in D.C., I'll definitely have a beer with him. I've met him a few times. But part of the reason why Lee is not vocal against Nick and the allegations against Nick are very serious. I'm sure Austin's familiar with them as well. Is probably because they hanged out. They developed a friendship. Well, a lot of it's not them being, sneaky and evil. It's just it's hard for them to dissociate because of that friendship that they had with them.
No, I'm gonna counterpoint that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how corruption works.
Yeah,
corruption doesn't work because some evil guy wants to do bad things and goes looking for corrupt donors to do bad things for, except for Joe Biden, who admitted that flat out.
Yeah, he called himself a prostitute, which was sexist, I know.
But that aside.
But he actually said that. Yeah, there's a video of Biden early on saying, I'm a prostitute. I'll sell myself to the...
And Joe Biden aside, most corruption in politics isn't people doing that. It's these people who want to do nice things for their friends and family, or mix their office with their business in an inappropriate way because, well, I'm the same person, and these really basic emotional impulses that don't have anything to do with some of the real motives we think of behind corruption. And one thing I've noticed on a lot of the people who more angry and revolutionary types would call liberals and not anti-capitalists, I've noticed that cronyism.
Well, the journalists that suck up the politicians to get access, a lot of that's cronyism, and it could be construed as, they're just friends kind of thing. So I understand the point you're making.
David Dole trolls people for Anna Kasparian. He's DM'd people I know to ask them to please change their messaging to be more supportive of Biden.
By the way, if she's not a Democrat anymore, what is she going to do? Because she doesn't support third parties. She's going to become a Republican now?
Saw that.
So I'm going to be totally frank about that. I would expect Anna Kasparian to be a Republican after her little snit about the
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, she's convoluted with war criminals, like the late what's her name? She was Secretary of State.
That was a terrible softball interview with Albright. Yes.
Yeah, Albright. I mean, so if you're going to consort with war criminals, you don't have principles. You might well join the Republican Party. I mean, she lied about Aaron Mate. I know Aaron Mate, works with Blumenthal, but I've been in touch with him in the past. I admire the hell out of the guy. I mean, she's just a liar, a proven liar. She has no principles. So she's going to either continue to work with the Democrats behind the scenes or join up with the Republicans, because apparently she hates all third parties. And there's plenty of other third parties besides MPP. I know she doesn't like Nick Rana, but she could join with the Greens. She could join with the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
She's not going to touch the Greens because, for all the reasons that lots of people who would otherwise seriously consider it won't, they're either too different from the Democrats, or they're too much like the Democrats, depending on who you ask and who you're
bourgeois Greens have experienced, yes.
She's not going to join the quote unquote tankies. She spent too much of her career trashing.
So is that what the PSL are supposed to be, tankies? Because I know a lot of PSL people in DC are good people.
Let's be fair.
What does that even mean, right? Tanky.
I don't mean to put I love the PSL. The PSL sort of grew up out of the Peace and Freedom Party in California, which is the original tanky party of the Black Panthers and the free speech movement, and is really the only thing left surviving of the Black Panthers and the free speech movement in California. Huey Newton ran for mayor of Oakland on the Peace and Freedom ticket. Eldridge Cleaver ran for Senate. Mario Savo ran for.
This is before Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. The original Rainbow Coalition was started by a Black Panther, Fred Hampton.
Brad Avakian ran for governor on the Peace and Freedom ticket before he started his own group. All of these quote-unquote original revolutionary tankies were part of the Peace and Freedom Party.
And the word tanky comes from the Hungarian invasion of Soviet tanks. And they say, you're a tanky because you supported that or whatever.
And people call the PSL tankies because the PSL are very supportive of all the existing communist states. which makes sense if you're going to say we're a communist party.
Yeah, and you know what, guys, you know what I often say? You know what's to me one of the biggest differences between the left in the United States and the left in a lot of places like Latin America? I just look at what's happening in Colombia right now.
Yeah.
Pacto Histórico. I could never, ever see in the United States the Greens, PSL, CPUSA, and everybody putting their shit aside and saying, let's get together and
one candidate.
And that's what we need to do.
Happening in Latin America.
We're too divided, and they did it in Latin America. They did it in Venezuela. We know that.
They did it. Well, it
happened in Peru with Pedro Castillo as well. That was
Castillo won in Peru because everybody on the Peruvian left, from the electoral communists to the diehard Posadists. Exactly. I exaggerate. The real Posadist party that's still left in Latin America is in Uruguay, not Peru. But everybody, every facet of the left, except the people still hiding in the mountains shooting at the government, supported Castillo.
Exactly. I went to Peru to observe that election. Patria Roja.
I didn't know that. I'm jealous. I'm half Peruvian. I should have went.
Nuevo Peru, who are like the DSA in Peru, like the Democratic Socialist Party. Peru Libre, who are more Marxist-Leninist.
Well, did you meet Alex? Did you meet Alex Flores, the Peruvian congressman that was hanging out with me the whole time in Venezuela?
I did not. Actually, I met a lot of people in Peru. I got to meet.
He's the same age as me, and his name Alex, like Alex Saab too. And we were hanging out there. We immediately clicked, and we still stay in touch on WhatsApp from time to time.
I don't think I did actually, but
yeah, he was one of the Peruvian leftists pushing Pedro Castillo to restore diplomatic relations with Venezuela, which they did. They did before Argentina. Argentina just recently finally restored diplomatic relations because of the Argentines that we were hanging out with, like Christina. That was observing and coming back and saying, hey, Alberto Fernandez, it's time to start work with Venezuela. We witnessed the elections. It was legit.
And I love that Fernandez did it during a press conference with that sellout, with that bourgeois Guillermo Lasso in Ecuador, making him sweat by saying it's time we talk directly with Venezuela, and that means working with Maduro.
Lasso was embarrassed by that.
They're just like,
he's like, are my imperialist masters in Washington going to be offended that I stood next to this guy while he announced this? That's what Lasso was thinking.
Yeah, dude.
Since Ecuador came up, can we just say that Lenin Moreno is the most misnamed person in the world right now?
Oh my goodness! Seriously,
oh God!
What a badass!
His parents.
I
like
know.
The guy, he single-handedly, caused Assange to be kidnapped from their own embassy. I mean,
yes,
pretty much.
But Lenin Moreno, that's basically like Brown Lenin, right?
Yes, but he's the opposite of the Brown Lenin. He's a sellout.
Damn it! Almost as bad as Stalin Gonzalez in Venezuela.
Well, hey, the one thing I have some criticisms of Stalin, but
Stalin worked with the West more than Lenin did. The reason why the West hated Lenin so much is because the very first thing he did when he took power was completely cancel the national debt.
Well, Lenin.
So the bankers immediately said, "Okay, we need to start invading or sabotaging the Soviet Revolution as soon as we can."
He also very quickly made peace with the Germans as soon as he possibly could. Because
it was a tactical necessity.
War was good for the Soviet.
He wanted to end World War I. The Russian people wanted that. Yeah.
And there was this weird, bizarre fantasy by some Soviets. Bukharin was one of them, about keeping on and fighting the Germans solo without any affiliation with the rest of the Allies to try to spread a revolution to Germany. And who knows? Maybe it would have worked. A revolution.
We'll think about it this way: in early 1919, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg were assassinated during the Spartacus uprising. That was directly influenced by the October Revolution in Russia.
Not assassinated, executed. It's important to understand that the person who ordered.
Well, yes, they had them under their
had
control.
Authority.
They were being held, and then they were executed.
He had authority. He was the leader of the Freikorps, which was an unofficial military police organization that nevertheless had very official power. And who signed the paperwork?
Wasn't it Ebert, the Social Democrat chancellor?
Yes, the decision to hire right-wing veterans as a secret police for the government was made by the so-called social.
And the Freikorps were the precursor to the Nazis. They were working in cahoots at that time.
Well, the Freikorps, yes, the Freikorps were precursors to the Nazis. None of the people who founded the German Workers' Party were members of the Freikorps, but lots of the people who joined the SA came from the Freikorps, and the
SA was before the SS. Those were like the original Nazis.
The few people from the SA who were considered trustworthy enough to be moved to the SS before the SA were all killed were former Freikorps people.
Freikorps, exactly. They continue on in the SS.
Rome's buddies. Because, of course, one of the big secrets was Ernst Röhm had filled the SA with people who were more loyal to him than Hitler and who were more socialist than Nazi.
And there were some gays in the mix, and they used the whole homosexual thing to shut down the SA and then incorporate into the SS. So.
Well, there's all sorts of, but basically what it came down to is Röhm wanted Hitler to take over the government so then he could take over the Nazi party. And he thought that would be the easiest way of staging what he considered a socialist revolution. It wasn't real socialism. It was more like some of the, like what one might call national Bolshevism these days.
So many contradictions about these
I love the road we're going down, but I'm actually going to have to head out myself here in a moment. I don't know if
I understand.
He's not in contact with Dennis at all, or Dennis is
no. I have either he got busy or there.
I actually have Dennis on WhatsApp. So we've been trying to reach out to him on DM, and when it's DM, it doesn't show the notification. So at this moment, I'll try to write him on WhatsApp and see what's going on. But thank you for coming on, Austin. Oh yeah, tell people where they can find your Mate and Machete podcast that I had the honor of being on a couple months ago.
I think I got one of our nice little boom. Here we go, Machete Mate. We love it. Beautiful. Yeah, but yeah, you can find us on Twitter.
Mate was Che's favorite drink.
Exactly, bro. And Macheteros, Puerto Rico. You already know. Anyways,
the Macheteros were Maximo Gomez too, the Dominican leader in Cuba.
Revolutionary. You already know. So yeah, that's what the podcast I do with a couple homies, Machete Mate. We cover specifically Latin American current events from a Marxist perspective. You can also find me on Twitter at Gaius_Gracchus_. If you're a Latin Rome nerd, you'll understand the reference.
Yeah, Michael Parenti talks a lot about that guy.
Exactly.
The most recent actual published work that I did was for The Internationalist, which is a startup communist magazine, actually by the youth wing of a bunch of communist parties around the world. Good stuff, good people involved. I like them. And I just wrote a thing how we really needed to listen to what's his name? We need to listen to Tarquinius Superbus more and cut the heads off more tall poppies.
I love it. I love a good Rome reference. I love it.
Dennis is getting back to me right now. Don't leave quite yet, Austin. 1 second.
Okay, so I was going to make one more plug anyways. So I plug the podcast, right? Machete Mate, plug myself, right? But also the responsible thing, the actual work that I do, right? As I mentioned, I was on the board of directors for DSA for a while, not anymore, but I still do work with the International Committee. I'm still a member of DSA. I still believe in, like I said, bringing all the flags together. I dream of a U.S. historic pact where we can all come together.
And for those of you who are not either members of DSA or, like myself, interested DSA watchers, the basic simplistic binary to remember about DSA is International Committee good guys, National Political Committee bad guys.
I will since I'm no longer on the National Political Committee, I will say yes. I agree with that.
Obviously not.
Dennis said he's going to try to go into the StreamYard. Dennis said he's going to go to StreamYard right now. So just be aware he should be any second in the StreamYard link.
Beautiful. We'll do a tag team. I'll tag out when he tags in.
But yeah. That way you're going to say hi to him because I'm sure you remember Dennis. He was all over the place.
I love Dennis. I first met Dennis in Peru.
So he was smoking some Cuban cigars when I first met him in the patio of the hotel. Oh, you met him in Peru too? Yeah, he travels all over the place. I remember he produced a film about Evo Morales, the coup against Evo Morales, and Evo Morales endorsed it. Here it is. Comrade Dennis, welcome.
Mexican.
Yeah, my apologies for the.
Where's your famous beret?
It's my fault for not checking out your time. So I mean that's part of it too. I gave you U.S. time, so that's partially my fault too.
Anyway, apologies for that. Also, it's good to know that it's best to sort of send the links straight to the phone.
Yeah, I should have gave him your phone number. I just remembered
Yeah.
last moment I have you on WhatsApp because I kept DMing you, but it's hard to see the notifications when it's Twitter. I just did a screenshot. Shows all four of us. I know Austin has to go soon, but Austin, go ahead and give your greetings to our comrade Denis.
Yes, Dennis, I'm just heading out now, but it's good to see you. We'll be in touch. I know you. I might be helping you out with something soon, so we'll see how that goes. But we'll be in touch.
Austin. All right, thanks. Well, I'll be the backup now for the now. Heading off.
I was gonna say, well, tagging you in, Dennis. Tagging you in.
All right, Did you ever see the picture of Dennis and me at the burial site of Hugo Chavez, Austin?
That sounds amazing. I don't think I have.
It's my cover picture now on Twitter. Make sure to check that out. And it's interesting. You remember, Dennis? It was so emotional going to that site that you're not even aware of your surroundings. You're just overwhelmed as a socialist being at this site. So I wasn't even aware you were near me. I actually had a Venezuelan friend send me the picture later, and I'm like, "Wait, Dennis was there when I was there." Then I put two and two together, and you were wearing your famous red beret at that moment. But that was such an emotional moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, most certainly. It's not, and I think that's the emotion really comes just from the fact that just how accessible that place is, and where it is situated. Like it is situated in the most popular neighborhoods of Caracas. So we have to realize, all the people that live there, working class people, they're also like the guardians of that place.
Exactly, ways, and you can see the presidential palace of Miraflores from the fort where Hugo Chavez is buried. And I don't know if you ever read my blog, Dennis, about my experience going to Venezuela, but I talk about this woman I was speaking with, one of our guides, a Venezuelan woman. And we were overlooking, before we entered the tomb, the presidential palace of Miraflores. And I mentioned the 2002 million Chavistas that showed up to demand his return when they almost assassinated him. And I asked her where she was that day, and she said she was there. She was there at the palace. So that was very impactful as well.
Well, there you go.
Well, I'm heading out.
All right, Austin, peace.
Austin, we'll see you soon.
Indeed.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we still got about another 35 minutes for the show, so you can be here for the last portion.
Sounds good. Sounds good for us.
So you're in Mexico now, right? You're back in Mexico?
Yes. Well, I just returned there a few days ago from Cuba.
You were there for May Day. That must have been quite an honor.
Well, yes. Well, for May Day and for the International Book Fair and a whole bunch of other things. May Day, the May Day March was probably like the first mass action, or at least like the first proper political mass action of this size that I've seen in quite a long time. Just imagine the May Day in Havana is certainly something. So just imagine about 800,000 workers gathering in the center in the Plaza de la Revolución, and then just kind of heading off on the main highways towards the city. I'm talking about workers from all branches of different industries, and of course like different international delegations from all around the world. This Havana and Cuba, it lives and breathes international solidarity, and nowhere is it more felt than on May Day. So. Definitely.
I remember when I went to the Museum of the Revolution in Havana, and Che had several berets that he wore, and so one of Che's original berets is there as well.
In the museum, yeah,
in the museum.
Well, from what I noticed, kind of his things are kind of scattered all over Cuba. Different museums have different things. And speaking about museums, actually, they just recently opened the new Fidel Castro Center.
Oh wow!
In Havana, which is like a combination of museum and library.
Fidel would not permit it in his lifetime. He didn't want a single statue built to him when he was around because he didn't want to have the cult of personality.
Actually,
I have to ask, what does the Fidel Castro Center say officially about the Justin Trudeau story?
I'll get to that. Well, Alex, you are right. Actually, it's not just during his lifetime, but now it is also illegal to have statues or plazas.
Oh, that's interesting. I was unaware of that.
No, it's actually more strict now than it was in Fidel's lifetime. And actually, it was legal to build busts of Fidel, like official busts of Fidel, while he was alive. And in fact, there was only one single bust of Fidel that was actually officially built and approved, and which is now sitting in this Fidel Castro Center. Now it's now the center itself is, I said, it's absolutely amazing. It's got an interactive museum, excellent, top class. It's got talks all about Fidel's life. It's got interesting interactive shows there, presentations. It's absolutely fantastic. Anyone who goes to Havana, to Cuba, and wants to learn a bit more about Fidel's life, his youth, his work, everything, they should definitely go there.
Dennis, I want to quote you.
Yes.
For my new book that I'm working on. I don't know if you got a chance to see the intro that I released on my blog the other day. It's called The Diplomat. And it's all about Alex Saab case, exactly. And so I would love to quote you in some way for that. You got to meet with Camila. Austin didn't get to meet with her. I got to meet with her, but I believe you met with Camila Favre de Saab.
I interviewed. I interviewed.
You interviewed her too.
Exactly.
Yeah. I asked her a question once on Zoom, and I got to meet her in person briefly. But you actually got to speak with her at length, correct?
Yeah, definitely during my November visit to Venezuela. I was actually in Venezuela just now as well in April.
Yeah, you're going there all the time. That's great.
Yeah.
So you have several passports, right? I would think you have at least 3. You got Australian, Russian, Mexican. Huh? You got 5?
That's classified.
Oh, that's classified. I'm sorry. No, but I'm curious about your background, because I mentioned to Austin earlier when we were talking about you, I was like, well, I think he was born in Australia, but his parents are Russian. Is that correct? Or
I was born in Russia, and my parents are Russian.
Oh, but you lived for a time in Australia.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I know you're fluent in Russian, of course. So you speak at least 3 languages, no?
English, Russian, Spanish, and
Your Spanish is great. I remember you were talking Spanish to everybody all around. I even practiced some Spanish with you. Yeah, you had some Cuban cigars with you. That was good.
Actually, they were Nicaraguan.
No, they were Nicaraguan because you just came from Nicaragua, and then you were in Peru recently too with Austin, correct?
That's right. Well, that's where I met Austin actually, and then we caught up in Nicaragua.
Yeah, Nicaraguan cigars actually aren't as big a deal for us Americans because I don't know if you know this. There is an embargo with Nicaragua, but it's not as strict. So you can still get Nicaraguan cigars. I bought a bottle of Venezuelan rum the other day. So there's certain things you can get still, but Cuban, no, you cannot buy Cuban. You can bring Cuban cigars, but you can't sell them here.
The thing is that all the rich people in New York City didn't spend all their time in Nicaragua. They spent all their time in Cuba, and so they developed the taste for Cuban cigars.
Yes.
I mean, that's just how.
Well, I heard when President Kennedy knew that we were going to be quarantined, he went to the nearest cigar shop in D.C. and bought up all the Cuban cigars he could because he loved Cuban cigars. He knew it was going to be a long time before he could buy any again.
Well, he was a rich SOB, remember?
Yeah, he had the money to buy those cigars too, of course.
Well, but anybody who knows anything about maintaining cigars, would know that actually the joke was on him unless he had proper facilities because it's not just about buying cigars; it's also about maintaining them. Unless you get a proper storage room, it's properly a proper level of humidity. These cigars are bound to kind of come apart within about 8 months or so.
That's interesting.
That's what happens to pure natural unrefined tobacco. It just kind of
it's not like wine where you can store it away in the cellar for years. With tobacco, it's quite different. Yeah,
that's why there's a special box called a humidor.
Called the what?
Humidor, which is the French cigar holder that was supposed to maintain a higher humidity than the room around it.
I see.
So I quit smoking last year and haven't smoked since. But one of the last cigars I ever tried was one actually I got from Dennis. It was a Nicaraguan cigar. Now that I see him, I'm remembering that. Mm-hmm. I was savoring that cigar while I was in the lobby, not in the lobby, in the patio part of the hotel, relaxing outside of Caracas. Because those days were intense. You remember we were traveling constantly, going to voting centers, going to factories, going everywhere. And so we get back to the hotel and be like, oh, but it was great. I'm not complaining. I mean, and you were full of adrenaline and energy while you're traveling and doing all those things. And you're used to traveling. You travel a lot more than me, Dennis. I mean, you're all over the place. You're like the international man of mystery.
Yeah, well, I think I might be slowing down this year though. Like I want to I think this year I'll be focusing more on Mexico and maybe
Yeah,
Cuba as
because
well.
Ciudadano is Chilean based, right?
Chilean
The
as well,
paper that
exactly,
you
yeah.
write for, but you're their affiliate in Mexico, right? And then you travel on assignments for them and all that.
And I do I serve as the international editor. So basically, anything happens in Latin America outside of Chile, or anything big happens in the world for that matter, this is what I usually focus on. But speaking of Chile, it's good that you brought this topic up, Alex, because on 4th of September they will organize the referendum to approve the new constitution, which is just being sort of being completed by the Constituent Assembly, or Constitutional Convention rather.
I heard there's a conference coming up in Tijuana.
Yes, organized by the labor movements, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think I would be able to go because it's too short notice. It's in June.
Yeah.
But I'll definitely be covering it, trying to get any information about the conference. I heard a lot of Americans that couldn't go, like me, to Venezuela are going to go to Tijuana instead because it's logistically more easy to get there.
No, yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Plus, you don't have to explain AMLO as much as you have to explain Maduro to the conservatives on the far right of the DSA Big Tent.
Yeah, we're talking Austin about DSA. Yeah, because Austin is a DSA leader, and he's more on the revolutionary side of that.
Certainly.
Well, by the way, Denis has a history, Chris. I don't know if you know this, of working with both Jacobin and the Gray Zone. So he's very dynamic. He's worked with a lot of different outlets, right, Denis?
Certainly. Well, I think dynamic also, I would say, not just in the ideological sense, but also in the sense of the type of journalism, the type of writings that I conduct. So I think with our friends in Gray Zone, I tended to publish more articles that were more like kind of on the journalist side, more like news and analysis.
Are you still in touch with Ben Norton?
Yes, I am.
Oh, please give him our greetings. We were actually trying to get him on. Chris and I are not on Facebook, and it's really hard to get in touch with people on Twitter. But if you could please speak to him at some point, we'd love to have Ben on. We have a lot of respect for him.
Certainly. Well, I think I think Ben would be just right for this audience.
Oh yeah, he's an anti-imperialist. He does a lot of great interviews. We'd love to have another anti-imperialist voice on here. I had a question for you about Baltasar Garzón. I always confuse Baltasar with Alberto because that's another leftist from Spain.
Yes.
But I don't know if they're related. But Baltasar, you actually, I don't know if you sat down face to face, but I know you were one of the journalists in El Ciudadano who interviewed Garzón, and he represents both Saab and Assange at this point as part of their international team. What was it like interviewing him, and was it face to face?
I tell you what, I've met Garzón a few times face to face, but I interviewed him. I've only managed to interview him, I'll say through. I think it was like same way, like virtual,
right?
Online. We were talking and we were discussing. No, I believe we were actually discussing the case of Alex Saab at that time. So this was actually before the extradition.
Yeah, he was still in Cape Verde. I read the interview. I was very impressed with it.
Yeah. Well, we have to remember that Garzón is someone who's always kind of he's already kind of built a profile in Spain as being like the lead judge of in the case against.
Pinochet.
Not just Pinochet, even before that. Well, or around the same time, against the former military heads of the Franco regime.
Oh yeah, in Spain as well. Yes, of course.
And that's actually the reason. And that was actually the reason why. Sorry, this was after the Pinochet trials, and he was actually in some ways blocked by one of the main. Courts in Spain, the Audiencia Nacional, from pursuing the case further.
Yeah, I heard up until the 1980s, most of the judiciary was under Francoist control. So even though there was a transition from monarchy to constitutional monarchy, which was supposed to be non-Francoist, a lot of the courts were holding back a lot of the progress there. And Garzón was one of the ones fighting that, no?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, because there were kind of two factors here, like because one of the main judicial and legal institutions of the Franco regime, so the Audiencia Nacional or National Audience, actually survived the transition and is still operating today.
Well, the Catalan rapper, I forget his name, he's in prison now for insulting the monarchy. That's still technically illegal.
No, he's not in prison. He's in exile in Brussels.
Oh, okay, he got out. Okay, but he was sentenced for that. Yeah, that was one of the charges.
And recently, the extradition kind of order against him failed in Belgium. So
that's good, because I know the extradition against the president of Catalonia, who was in Germany, was accepted. He was returned, and then Assange got in trouble because he said what I said at the time, because I know history as well, that when Nazi Germany was working with Franco, there was a Catalan leader then that fled and happened to be in Germany and was sent back as well.
And let's not pretend that the King of Spain isn't kind of a Francoist.
Oh,
the former king, the father of who's still alive, of the current king, worked with Franco. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, but I mean, even that he has used his personal prestige as king to do a lot of good for the Spanish right over the years.
Mm-hmm.
It's very complex because Juan Carlos's father actually was much more sympathetic to the Republicans, and they put Juan Carlos against his father. He betrayed his father to become king and work with Franco, actually. And Felipe, I heard, is more progressive than Juan Carlos. Felipe is more like his grandfather. So it's a little bit complex. I'm against monarchies. I'm just saying that how each of them thought was not, in those three generations, exactly the same either.
Yeah. Well, we could also talk about a whole bunch of stuff about what Juan Carlos is doing at the moment, and that is, escaping justice.
Yeah, he's in the Emirates, escaping justice. Yes.
Yeah, a permanent resident,
being protected. The Spanish monarch being protected by the Muslims. Now that's ironic. Didn't they throw the Muslims out?
Well, so let's remember who the emirs of the United Arab Emirates are. I mean, these are rich people who were considered important enough that despite the fact they're technically quasi-dependency of the Saudi royal family, they were allowed to set up their own country. There's a lot of corruption there. There's a lot of connection with the U.S. and British governments. The oil sheiks are some of the most pro-colonial people in the Middle East. They have really great relationships with American oil. Ironically, and this was one of the reasons that Jimmy Carter was kind of willing to let the Ayatollah get rid of him before he changed his mind. Ironically, the most anti-Western leader of OPEC was the Shah, and after the Shah of Iran was overthrown, OPEC started to increasingly do the West bidding more because of the relationship between the Saudi royal family and the American government.
And also, now that Qatar is outside the sphere of the Saudis, their journalists are fair game. I'm sure the Saudis were rejoicing when the Israelis recently killed the Palestinian Al Jazeera journalist, and of course Al Jazeera is based out of Qatar. They have not gone on any longer with the operation in Yemen. And also, if you look at the Bahraini royals, they're of the Sunni minority, of course run by the Saudis, but most of the Bahrainis are Shia, and you even had Sunni Shia solidarity against the corrupt Bahraini regime.
And the Bahrainis and the Kuwaitis, like the UAE, is again oil sheiks who are allowed to set up their own countries because of their corrupt relationships with Western oil companies that were independent enough of Saudi Arabia that the king couldn't stop them.
Part of the reason why Saddam was mad at the Kuwaitis was they didn't offer any troops to fight the Iranians.
Mm-hmm.
So he felt that they were ungrateful and that they should have given better oil deals to Iraq. And then the U.S. pretty much gave the green light to Saddam to take care of the Kuwaitis in the fashion that he wanted. So he thought. So that was kind of a setup that started the first Gulf War.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was an American dependent at that point. He wasn't going to start a war without what he thought was the U.S.'s approval.
Of course.
It's not like he just went completely rogue.
Just in case, the topic is Venezuela, but so Dennis, this is your first time on the program. Chris and I love to go off on tangents. That's why we're eclectic. But it's all related to history and historical analysis. I guess I could ask you something about Venezuela because we're talking more about Cuba and the Middle East right now. You as an election observer, and you with your international background and being well-traveled in Latin America, how democratic do you see Venezuela, and why is there so much hostility to Venezuela? Not just the United States, but the more right-wing Latin American governments, how they've been hostile to Venezuela. What is this hostility for, and how democratic are they, in your opinion?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to know that apparently, starting from today, the United States think Venezuela is a little bit more democratic because the United States has officially approved oil purchases from Venezuela once again, for the first time in 8.
Which has to do with what's going on with your compatriots in Russia and the Russian oil embargo, of course.
Certainly that, but I think that that brings me to a following point. In the conventional sense of democracy, what people consider to be democracy in the Western countries, in the United States and in Europe, the democracy seems to be tied to whatever whoever is considered to be a friend of the United States. This is not. This is the main. This is the main line of thinking. Now, but all this aside,
famous democratic leaders like Pinochet.
Exactly. Or basically everybody who we just mentioned now in the conflict in the Middle East.
Yes, exactly.
Throughout different time periods. Now, throughout all the times that I've been to Venezuela, I've been visiting Venezuela since 2012. Not on a regular basis, but at least able to kind of compare how things were during the time of Chavez compared to the times of Maduro and compared to the times recently.
I plan to get a Peruvian passport so I can travel to Venezuela more frequently. Yeah.
That would be awesome. That would definitely be worth it. I would say that Venezuela is a country which I would say has still maintains kind of a dual power structure, if you can say. On one hand side, it still maintains the old kind of parliamentary system, which was of course originally based on the kind of models which are used in Western countries, particularly the United States. So parliamentary democracy, the national assemblies, the presidency. So these kinds of elected structures. Now, but parallel to these structures runs a whole different kind of pyramid of popular power, which is maintained by a wide array of different social organizations and social structures. We're talking about communal councils, particularly, of which there are almost 30,000 throughout Venezuela, and within this parallel structure, this is where we really find we influence of the revolutionary movements of Venezuela, so of the different social movements, the way they're able to pressure, the way in many ways they're able to pressure and sort of push the government, say the parliamentary side, let's call it, the parliamentary side of the government towards taking more radical approach in the country. Now, of course, this is also of course we have to remember Venezuela, being since being a capitalist country and a neoliberal country before Chavez being elected, it also inherited a lot of the old structures from that order, particularly corruption and still a lot of the cultural mindset.
Yeah, and
cultural attributes.
Not all the Citgo execs and bankers fled to the U.S.
No, not at all. And they've actually the ones that remain. We actually have to remember that even during these sort of years of crises, they still remained in Venezuela and still played a part in organizing the opposition as well. So but I believe that at the end of the day, the democracy in Venezuela is defined. Is not defined, by whether by who gets the most votes, whether it's the Chavista bloc or the opposition bloc. I think at the end of the day, democracy in Venezuela is defined by the way in which the popular structures are allowed and are able to exert their influence on the old political structures.
And what's interesting about that is that's very Murray Bookchin. With the American idea of dual power and the notion that if we could just start neighborhood communes and use them to push our local government, then we could start statewide communes of communes and push those governments, and so on, all the way up the chain.
Well, there's one element there that's sort of that's kind of missing, is that this process was really kind of propelled by Chavez's.
Of course, you have to have leadership and someone actually pushing the agenda.
Yes, certainly. So it was. So I say that the election of Chavez was what kind of really helped to help to escalate this process. But I think like the best piece of evidence to back this this belief that I have, to back kind of my argument, has to do with what happened in 2002. It has to do with with the failed coup attempt against Chavez. We have to remember that at this point in time, politically speaking, Chavez was still kind of a moderate left-wing leader in Latin America. This was long before he proclaimed the socialist character of the Bolivarian Revolution. This was long before he
just called himself a Bolivarian, not a socialist yet.
Exactly. So he basically proclaimed himself to be kind of a progressive nationalist of sorts, in a way.
Yes.
And this was also before the first nationalizations of the oil industry as well, of course. So so in some ways at this point in time, Chavez was still kind of more like a political vessel for the popular movements in Venezuela to be able to organize and at least get breathing space. But the coup against Chavez, I think, is what changed a whole lot of this. It was the failed attempt and the mass mobilizations in their support, I think, is this evidence of these mass organizations radicalizing an ongoing political process and pushing the key leader there to the left. It was that sort of kind of political experience which really catapulted Chavez from his moderate sort of left wing nationalist positions to beginning to embrace Marxism.
It did say something for Chavez's character, right? A lot of leaders would return to power intimidated that they were literally almost assassinated by the United States. Instead, he came back more defiant than ever and more determined to advocate for open socialism.
What happens? What happens when you're saved by somebody? You go with the ones who saved you. And the popular movements that he had given space showed up for him in the coup. That was the reason he didn't lose power.
Certainly, and this is and we saw it time and time again throughout the following years of his presidency. The oil lockdown that happened a year later, and the way the people organized around that, the recall referendum, the presidential election after that. Constitutional referendums, the economic crisis, time and time again, it was really, Chavez's kind of agenda, his political compass was being, sort of turned more and more towards socialism and towards kind of becoming more of a unifier in some ways.
Yes.
One of the first countries he allied with was Argentina, which is a major country in Latin America. That started the so-called pink tide. That started the movement of the left. Ecuador rose up, Bolivia, Argentina, etc. And now with Peru having gone left and the potential soon for Colombia and Brazil to go left, that could definitely help better relations with Maduro and Venezuela overall. We mentioned earlier in the program that not only has Peru established once again diplomatic relations with Venezuela, recently Argentina has as well. I mean, there was many observers from Argentina that returned and told Alberto Fernandez, you need to change your position on this. And he finally has. And so, as you know, Boric is very center left. He's not pro-Maduro by any means. But if Brazil rises up, if Lula wins again, that could really pressure Boric and the others to have better relations with Venezuela as well, no?
And Lula said a lot of Lula's foreign policy positions and his views, his international views are, I'll say, very much actually more aligned with the old pink tide rather than with the new left-wing leaders. Like, Lula is someone who is very much embraced Chavez. Perhaps not as perhaps he didn't really adopt much of Chavez's ideology or the example of Venezuela, but Brazil maintained excellent relations with Venezuela throughout this whole.
And that's the largest country in all of Latin America.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's one of the largest countries in the world.
Yeah.
It used to be, and I never get tired of saying this, it used to be the most important country in the Western Hemisphere, even more than the United States.
Yeah, they were able to overthrow Portugal, right?
Yes, the Emperor of Brazil was able to go to Portugal and put his daughter on the Portuguese throne with a Brazilian army. That's not something that any other colony has ever done.
This is interesting. Yeah.
Also, the Confederates when the Confederates lost, they went to Brazil because they practiced slavery till the 1880s. So you had Americans that were going for jobs to Brazil. Brazil was a very prosperous country at one point.
There was a war that Brazil needed to fight around the same time that the Civil War was ending. The War of the River Plate was still going on. That's one of the
Argentina,
longest wars in history. That was Brazil, Argentina, and a rebel group in what's now Uruguay against Paraguay. Uruguay was part of Paraguay then. It lasted
90% of the Paraguayan men died in the war.
It started before the U.S. Civil War began and ended after it ended.
Yeah.
Most of the population, like the entire adult male population of Paraguay was decimated. They had something like 75% adult male casualties.
No, it was more. The women ended up having to fight in Paraguay because 90% of the adult males died.
Battlefield casualties, but like 75% of the adult males in the country over the entire period of the war basically died. It was huge numbers.
It was devastating, regardless. But a good book on that touches on it is the Uruguayan writer Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America. Oh, yes. He touches on the war and the consequences of the war against Paraguay.
In the end, Brazil and Argentina won because they had more resources, but Paraguay lasted a whole lot longer than the Confederate States.
Do you know who instigated the war between Chile, Bolivia, and Peru? Was the British and the Germans, because they wanted the minerals out of Antofagasta in modern day northern Chile. So they were advancing those divisions. I haven't studied the war with Paraguay enough to know if European powers were instigating that conflict, but I know when it came to Chile, that was the case.
What it was about. So the thing to remember is that Brazil was more powerful than all of the minor European powers at that time. Brazil was, in a sense, a European power as more than Portugal or Spain.
Well, yeah, they were Portuguese monarchs that were controlling Brazil, living in Brazil, that had left.
Brazil was a more important country on the world stage than Portugal or Spain.
Well, they defeated Portugal also.
Yes, well, that came later. That had happened earlier because this was Pedro II when this war happened. But anyway, it was a big deal. They only won because of superior resources. Paraguay had this massive popular mobilization. One, during the early years of the war, the Brazilians didn't start having successes until the emperor came to the field and took personal command and brought the morale up by being.
They lost their coast, just like Bolivia lost their coast to Chile. Paraguay lost their coast.
Yes. They lost territory to both Brazil and Argentina, and of course the rebels got what's now Uruguay. But they almost won. They won the early.
Every time you say Uruguay and rebel, I think of the Tupamarus. You know, the former president of Uruguay was a political prisoner. He was a Tupamaru, and Tupamaru stems from Tupac Amaru, who was the Inca revolutionary that fought the Spaniards. Yeah,
yes.
And who is actually in Bolivia and Peru.
Yeah, Bolivia and Peru, and they also have the Aymara leader Tupac Katari, who was in Bolivia. But I think Tupac Amaru II also had battles in in Bolivia, east of Cusco. Bolivia and Peru were the same country at one point as well. Spanish.
Bolivian,
and then, of course, during the Incas, they had a lot of battles with the Aymara, and they had some control of the area there. And with the Guarani as well, there was several Guaranis in modern-day Bolivia. And, of course, the Mapuche fought the Incas as well. They're right there in Chile, Argentina, part of Bolivia. Fascinating history. Oh, do you know the word Che comes from Mapuche?
Yeah.
So when Argentines call each other like buddy, hey, Che. Che means people in that Mapuche language because Mapuche means people of the land. Mapu, the land, Che, people.
Yes. That's good to know.
So and that's both in Chile and in Argentina.
Yeah, correct. There's Mapuche populations in Chile as well.
In Chile, particularly.
And there's also some Inca in Argentina. In Jujuy, near the Bolivian border, there's a famous Inca rebel that's a political prisoner now that's in better conditions under Alberto Fernandez. She's in house arrest. I met somebody that was from Jujuy in Venezuela, Milagros Salas. Yeah. And she's an Inca, indigenous Inca from Argentina. So it's not just Mapuche people that were in those borderlands.
It's up in the north. I'd say near the borders with Bolivia, you also find Quechuas.
That's what I mean by Inca, Quechua, yeah, because some of them call themselves Quechua. I mean, that's the language that the Incas spoke, right? And then there's different dialect of Quechua. I mean, the Quechua spoken in the northern part, like in Ecuador, they pronounce it Quichua, but it's the same language, yeah.
Effectively,
like up to 10 million people speak it. It's like there's no other indigenous group that has so many people that speaks the language in the Americas than Quechua.
I think there's about 45 million speakers overall.
Really? I thought it was only 10 million.
No,
well, some of the people that speak are mestizos. So maybe I'm thinking 10 million because there's 10 million pure Inca, and then there's mestizos that also speak Quechua. Yeah. Yes.
I think like Quechua as a family, as a family of languages. Yes, it's part.
Yes.
Or actually, maybe it's less. Maybe it's less because I was thinking about. Sorry, I was adding Quechua and the Aymara together. So I think you're actually right.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of words that are similar in Aymara that they are to Quechua. I mean, I just gave an example of Tupac Atanqui and Tupac Amaru, and they were not both Inca. Mm-hmm. One was Aymara, the other was Inca. They had a common enemy though in the Spaniards.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, that was...
People hear Tupac in the United States and they think of the rapper.
Well,
his name was Black Panthers. They named him after Tupac Amaru. His middle name was Amaru, but
to be honest, that's actually a great sort of. There's a really nice sort of chain of I would say understanding, like a chain of understanding of why Tupac Shakur is actually named like that. Asada, his aunt certainly has an interesting role.
Did you run into her in Cuba? They say Asada Shakur is still down there.
Asada is still down there, but I don't know. I wouldn't know.
God, you have access to head of state. You got to interview exclusively Camila Fabi the Saab. I would not be surprised if you ran into Asada Shakur.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
She likes her privacy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes.
She wrote a book when she was in Cuba. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Basically, an autobiography.
She did. Yeah. I've got a copy of that.
Excellent.
I'm still slowly reading it. It's really good.
It's legendary, her prison break, right? Like I got to meet Oscar Lopez Rivera, right, in Miami when we went to the Alex Saab hearing, and he was in prison for 36 years. But she was not in prison that long. There was a legendary prison break, and she was able to hide for a couple of years in safe houses, and then fled to Cuba. It's something of legend what she was able to accomplish.
Well, I mean, some people they just don't want to stay in prison, and they find a way to get out.
I mean, look at Fred Hampton. They said that Fred Hampton was either going to flee to Cuba or Algeria or both, and he said, no, I'm going to stay and do the sentence. And then of course they drugged him and they killed him. But that's what the empire does. But with Asada, by her escaping, I think it was an honorable thing because she was able to escape the clutches of the empire and write her book and do her work.
Yes. And it's it was pretty terrible circumstances. And those were the days when the New Jersey State Police Department was, I mean, I'm sure they still are now, but was much more shameless about things like killing prisoners.
I mean, remember the Attica riots, right? I mean, such brutality. Oh, you notice Assange is up there?
Yes, yes,
Poster,
I
yeah.
noticed it at the start.
So, Dennis, you haven't been in Australia for so long. Did you ever meet Assange?
Well, we have to remember that Assange actually spent a lot more time in London.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. He wasn't. He actually. He hasn't. I'm not sure if he's even been to Australia for throughout this century that much.
He did activism in Australia early on,
Very early on, yeah.
but then he
That was
moved to
long ago.
England, and then he was doing work in Scandinavia. He had been to the U.S. once, but he didn't do much work in the U.S. I think he was on the U.S. once briefly, which is why it baffles me that they could charge him with espionage. He's not a U.S. citizen. He barely spent any time here.
The reason that they can charge him with espionage is because they've convicted people who were associated with him of it already.
Well, yeah, Chelsea Manning, and Chelsea Manning refused to testify further against him. He was held under contempt and had to attempt to commit suicide for them to finally have her let go.
Under the depraved rules by which quote unquote international society operates, the foreign national who the spy gives the information to is technically also chargeable under the Information Act. Benedict Arnold got away, but the British soldier Captain Andre was captured and executed by the
Yeah, but the Espionage Act was long after the Revolution.
But I mean the evolution. But even before then, there's always been this idea that even military spies were fair game when you caught them. And so you could always charge the foreign national that somebody gave something to with espionage. And merely the fact that someone was a foreign national was sometimes enough to charge the person giving it to them. That wasn't done very often. And the Espionage Act as it exists now is really new.
So anyways, I got to meet John and Gabriel Shipton, Dennis. I don't know if
John Shipton. Yeah, of course. I interviewed John.
Oh, that's great. I actually sent John your interview with Garzón. He liked it. He didn't mention that he knew you, but he said, "Oh, I like that. I love Garzón." But yeah, I met the father and the brother when they were coming to the United States. Their first stop was in Miami. I drove down to see them.
All right. I think that might have been. When was that exactly?
That was in 2021. I think it was either May or June.
All right.
Just before they went to D.C., they went up to D.C., Boston, Vermont. I think they even went to the Midwest and the West Coast. But when they first arrived in Miami, one of the first things I asked them is, "Have you heard of Alex Saab?" And they said no. And then Alex Saab was brought up in the panel. And then a couple weeks passed, and they went to D.C., and Anya Parampil came up to Gabriel Shipton, Assange's brother, and he started talking about Alex Saab. And then I heard the news: Assange lawyer Garzón now representing Alex Saab. I was so happy about that. But there's only so much Garzón can do now that he's in the clutches of the imperialists. He's part of the international team, but he wasn't present at the court. He has other lawyers. Basically, if you believe that Alex Saab is an informant for the United States, then you might as well believe that Saddam still had the WMDs. This is what they do. This is what the imperialists do to discredit their victims.
Or that Assange was somehow helping in the Trump campaign in 2016.
Oh yeah, that was BS as well, of course. And he was in the Green Party convention, by the way. So if Assange was American, he voted for Jill Stein because he associated himself with the United States Green Party, not with the Republicans or the Democrats. And
Randy Credico isn't exactly a Trump supporter.
Oh yeah, Credico is one of the biggest supporters of Assange.
Yeah, but even beyond that, he's not a Trump guy. He's a semi-lefty.
Who's the way we're talking about?
Oh, Randy Credico. He's a pretty known Assange supporter. He's in the United States.
He's the guy they tried to make out to be the cutout between Roger Stone and Assange.
Right.
He was very upset by that because he does not consider himself associated with Republicans at all, Credico.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't like them. He hates Republicans worse than he hates Democrats, is how he put it.
It's a good point. But I was going to say something about Assange and I forgot. But Well, I'll put it this way: the Alex Saab and Julian Assange cases are quite similar, and I'm sure you studied them both, Dennis. For example, their charges, they're both charged with conspiracy. They're quite vague charges with little to no evidence. One of the charges against Assange is conspiring to hack, and the single charge that remains against, because the other charges were dropped against Saab, is conspiring to money launder. They're not even charging him money laundering, only conspiring to do so.
Well, and
these are political trials that they're using lawfare to persecute. What was that, Chris?
They're not even charging Assange with hacking, just conspiring to hack.
Exactly. And he was doing journalism. That's what journalists do. They work with their sources to find ways to protect their sources.
I mean, one of the other journalists, not even somebody who was particularly left-wing, but a mainstream guy, I can't remember who, but even he said, if my source says that they can't get secure information and my employer is willing to expense it, I'm absolutely going to hire a hacker. And this is a quote-unquote legitimate mainstream guy.
Yeah.
Who's anti-Assange, but who understands what a conviction of a journalist under the Espionage Act means, regardless of what you think of Assange's group.
They're using the fact that Assange hacked the United States. I think it was like a military facility in Australia when he was a teenager. He was part of the cyberpunks thing. It was kind of like, it wasn't even political. It was just, kind of a daring thing. Like, let me show how audacious I'm going to be. And later on, he became an activist. But this was like he was 15, 16 years old. Yeah. That's the reason why they didn't give him a heavy sentence, because he wasn't even a legal adult yet. Yes. So they used the fact that he has some background in hacking to say, oh, well, that's what he did with Chelsea Manning. No, that was a completely different situation. That was him acting as a journalist, protecting his source.
And if they think he did the hacking, then why didn't they charge him with doing the hacking and not conspiring to hack?
Exactly. But so I've confronted journalists in Miami and said, why are you saying he's a massive money launderer when that wasn't even the charge? But you can't even call these people journalists. We were talking about it earlier in the show, Dennis. I mean, they're just stenographers for the elite. They're stenographers for the military-industrial complex or the military intelligence complex. I mean, this is not real journalism, what they're doing.
Or they're stenographers for the Democratic Party, or they're stenographers for the Republican Party. Everybody's a stenographer for someone. Not always the same people, but everyone's a stenographer for someone, if they have a job in mainstream media. There's a whole tech magazine that I am convinced exists only to run stories about Elon Musk.
Sure.
Because they have their own editor just for Tesla. They're the only magazine I know that has its own editor just for Tesla.
Which magazine is that?
Oh, I can't even remember their name. It's small enough that I didn't even know they existed until I ran into their Tesla editor online.
Anyways, it's 11:40 where I am. It's getting late. I'd love us to have Dennis back on, maybe as an exclusive, because he wasn't able to be, I don't think, on as long as Austin. It's been a pleasure.
Apologies for that.
I support that. Go ahead.
All right.
You guys have a great night then. Thanks, Dennis, for joining us. I am sorry about the U.S. times. I will do a better job looking up Mexico times the next time.
That's all right. That's all right. We'll
are you going to be at the Tijuana conference? Because if you are, I want to get updates.
We'll see. We'll see. We'll see about that.
Okay. We'll see how it works out.
And feel free to let me know anytime you have a story that's not getting reported enough in the U.S. I'm always happy to talk about.
Chris has a huge following on Twitter, so he can help.
I have a middle following on Twitter. I mean,
both of you have bigger followings than me. I'm still learning this Twitter thing. On Facebook.
I'm also suppressed a whole bunch, so who knows?
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell sometimes. I know that the fans that I do have enjoy the show and keep saying nice things. And so I don't just feel like I'm doing this just to talk to people who are cool and pretend that I'm doing a show, which is how it started.
Oh, Dennis, we interviewed Lee Camp after he was thrown out of RT America?
Yeah, we did.
Yes.
Yeah, RT America, Lee Camp. I met him in D.C. a couple of times. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I was in person because unfortunately, I didn't get to meet him.
Well, I can help put you two in touch because Lee's a great guy.
He's a pleasant enough guy. He's kind of he's a crony guy. He's somebody who's one of the gang with the people he's really close to, and not necessarily.
Well, Dennis is not familiar with all the. He doesn't live in the United States. I don't know if you've ever even been here, Dennis, but there's kind of a scandal going on now with MPP. That's
not important. That's not important enough to worry international editors with. That's
no, I'm just saying that's the reason why he's saying what he's saying, because Chris and I have differences with the leadership of Move for People's Party, and Lee Camp maintains good relations with them. Regardless, I admired the hell out of him, and and I hope he continues to do good work. So it's a shame that he was thrown out of RT America. He did a lot of great work there.
The RT America got shut down. Everybody got thrown out.
Everybody got thrown out. It was terrible.
He wasn't thrown out. It was shut down by the U.S. government.
Yeah, exactly. That's. I should say shut down. You're correct. And I do go on Sputnik from time to time. Sputnik is still operational in D.C. I go on, Garland Nixon show and all that. So Sputnik's still around, and let's hope the truth gets out. We did talk about Ukraine earlier. I'm sure you're way more knowledgeable than us about that. I mean, you have a Russian background. But just before we leave, I mean, we were comparing. I said that Zelensky, and I think Chris agreed, Zelensky is like the Ukrainian Guaido, but with power, so he's more dangerous. Do you agree with that?
I actually said something similar a couple of months ago. I actually said, Zelensky is Guaido with power and a much better PR department.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, if you're actually president, it helps. I mean, the one thing that Zelensky can say, with more legitimately than the Poroshenko people before him, is, hey, I won the election. Guaido can't say that.
No.
He never ran. He never ran for president.
Exactly. Technically speaking, his interim presidency expired like a few weeks after he declared it, and the U.S. kept supporting him for months.
Well, he got thrown out of his own party. He's been replaced by Para in the.
Yeah, he's assembly. Not even recognized.
I think Para's not even in the assembly now, so he's lost all legitimacy and all justification.
Quietly dropped its official recognition of.
Yes, they dropped his title as well.
Officially
recognized. They shouldn't be holding Alex Saab anymore either. So let's hope that my book gets out, that the word gets out on the Alex Saab case, and that they release him as well.
I'm curious to see. Yeah, I'm curious to see. The way that the current negotiations actually affect Saab's case.
Yeah, it's tragic what's going on with him. I even heard they denied his cancer medication for his stomach cancer. Hopefully that changes now that he's in Miami. But when he was in Cape Verde, he was being tortured. The UN looked into it. It's quite tragic. So let's hope that resolves itself. But Spasifa, thank you for coming on, Dennis. It's been a real pleasure.
Isn't Cape Verde one of the countries that we used to rendition people to during the war on terror?
I'm not sure. I know what happened in Guantanamo. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I know that they renditioned people to Syria, but I'm pretty sure Cape Verde was one of the places they liked to take people because there weren't any laws about the cops torturing people.
I mean, I'd be surprised if it was Syria, though, because Assad is also a target of.
Well, but that's the whole thing. You have to remember that early on in the war on terror, Assad was a quote unquote U.S. ally in the war on terror, despite being named in the Axis of.
Well, that's because he had differences with Saddam, right? So,
and also because there are people in Syria who have a security relationship with people in the United States.
After the Soviet fall, that was established.
War with Assad's father, and that until the actual attempt to overthrow him, Bashar Assad's power was not monolithic in Syria. That's something that happened because of the attempt to overthrow him and the natural reaction to the same.
Well, peace, guys. Have a great night.
More powerful, basically.
All right. Thanks a lot, friends, and I hope to see you again soon.
Everybody have a great night, and folks, we'll tweet at you.
Right.